Hello everyone, welcome to Frightening Tales. I know you watch this video to accompany you to sleep, so if you like this video don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Also don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. An 18-year-old said she was attacked at knife point. Then she said she made it up. That's where our story begins. No one came to court with her that day, except her public defender. She was 18 years old, charged with a gross misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in jail. Rarely do misdemeanors draw notice. Her case was one of 4,859 filed in 2008 in Linwood Municipal Court, a place where the judge says the goal is to correct behavior to make Linwood a better, safer, healthier place to live, work, shop and visit. But her misdemeanor had made the news, and made her an object of curiosity or, worse, scorn. It had cost her the newfound independence she was savoring after a life in foster homes. It had cost her sense of worth. Each ring of the phone seemed to announce another friendship, lost. A friend from 10th grade called to ask, "How could you lie about something like that?" Marie, that's her middle name. Marie didn't say anything. She just listened, then hung up. Even her foster parents now doubted her. She doubted herself, wondering if there was something in her that needed to be fixed. She had reported being raped in her apartment by a man who had bound and gagged her. Then, confronted by police with inconsistencies in her story, she had conceded it might have been a dream. Then she admitted making the story up. One TV newscast announced, a Western Washington woman has confessed that she cried wolf when it came to her rape, she reported earlier this week. She had been charged with filing a false report, which is why she was here today, to accept or turn down a plea deal. Her lawyer was surprised she had been charged. Her story hadn't hurt anyone, no suspects arrested, or even questioned. His guess was, the police felt used. They don't appreciate having their time wasted. The prosecution's offer was this: if she met certain conditions for the next year, the charge would be dropped. She would need to get mental health counseling for her lying. She would need to go on supervised probation. She would need to keep straight, breaking no more laws. And she would have to pay $500 to cover the court's costs. Marie wanted this behind her. She took the deal. A little after 1 p.m. on a wintry day in January 2011, Detective Stacy Galbraith approached a long, anonymous row of apartment buildings that spilled up a low hill in a Denver suburb. Snow covered the ground in patches. It was blustery, and biting cold. She was there to investigate a report of rape. Galbraith spotted the victim standing in the thin sunlight outside her ground-floor apartment. She was young, dressed in a brown, full-length coat. She clutched a bag of her belongings in one hand. She looked calm, unflustered. Galbraith introduced herself. Police technicians were swarming the apartment. Galbraith suggested that she and the victim escaped the icy gusts in a nearby unmarked patrol car. The woman told Galbraith she was 26 years old, an engineering student on winter break from a nearby college. She had been alone in her apartment the previous evening. After cooking green mung beans for dinner, she curled up in bed for a marathon of Desperate Housewives and The Big Bang Theory until drifting off. At around 8 a.m., she was jolted awake by a man who had jumped on her back, pinning her to the bed. He wore a black mask that seemed more like a scarf fastened tight around his face. He gripped a silver and black gun. "Don't scream. Don't call or I'll shoot you," he told her. He moved deliberately. He tied her hands loosely behind her. From a large black bag, he took out thigh-high stockings, clear plastic high heels with pink ribbons, lubrication, a box of moist towelettes and bottled water. Over the next 4 hours, he raped her repeatedly. He documented the assault with a digital camera and threatened to post the pictures online if she contacted the police. Afterward, he ordered her to brush her teeth and wash herself in the shower. By the time she exited the bathroom, he had gone. He had taken her sheets and bedding. She clearly remembered one physical detail about him, a dark mark on his left calf the size of an egg. Galbraith listened to the woman with a sense of alarm. The attack was so heinous, the attacker so practiced. There was no time to waste. Sitting close to her in the front seat of the car, Galbraith carefully brushed the woman's face with long cotton swabs to collect any DNA traces that might remain. Then she drove her to St. Anthony North Hospital. The woman underwent a special forensic examination to collect more DNA evidence. Before she left with a nurse, the woman warned Galbraith, "I think he's done this before." Galbraith returned to the crime scene. A half-dozen officers and technicians were now at work. They were knocking on neighbors' doors, snapping photographs in the apartment, digging through garbage bins, swabbing the walls, the windows, everywhere for DNA. In the snow, they found a trail of footprints leading to and from the back of the apartment through an empty field. They spray-painted the prints fluorescent orange to make them stand out, then took pictures. It was not much, but something. One officer suggested a bathroom break. "Just keep working," Galbraith insisted. As she headed home that night, Galbraith's mind raced. "Who is this guy?" she asked herself. "How am I going to find him?" Galbraith often volunteered to take rape cases. She was a wife, a mother. She was good at empathizing with the victims, who were overwhelmingly women. Most had been assaulted by a boyfriend, an old flame, or someone they had met at a club. Those investigations often boiled down to an issue of consent. Had the woman said yes? They were tough for cops and prosecutors. Juries were hesitant to throw someone in prison when it was one person's word against another's. Rapes by strangers were uncommon, about 13% of cases. But there was still the issue of the woman's story. Was she telling the truth? Or fabricating a ruse to cover a sexual encounter gone wrong? In that way, rape cases were unlike most other crimes. The credibility of the victim was often on trial as much as the guilt of the accused. And on the long, fraught trail between crime and conviction, the first triers of fact were the cops. An investigating officer had to figure out if the victim was telling the truth. Galbraith had a simple rule: listen and verify. A lot of times people say, believe your victim, Galbraith said. But I don't think that that's the right standpoint. I think it's listen to your victim. And then corroborate or refute based on how things go. At home, her husband David had done the dishes and put the kids to bed. They sank down on separate couches in their living room. Galbraith recounted the day's events. The attacker had been cunning, attempting to erase any traces of DNA from the scene. Before he left, he showed the student how he broke in through a sliding glass door. He suggested she put a dowel into the bottom track to keep out future intruders. The victim had described him as a gentleman, Galbraith said. He's going to be hard to find, she thought. David Galbraith was used to such bleak stories. They were both cops, after all. He worked in Westminster, some 15 miles to the northeast. Golden and Westminster were middle-class bedroom towns wedged between Denver's downtown skyscrapers and the looming Rockies. This time, though, there was something different. As David listened, he realized that the details of the case were unsettlingly familiar. He told his wife to call his department first thing in the morning. "We have one just like that," he said. "She does not know if she attended kindergarten. She remembers being hungry and eating dog food. She reports entering foster care at age 6 or 7. The report on Marie's life, written by a mental health expert who interviewed her for 5 hours, is written with clinical detachment, describing her life before she entered foster care. She met her biological father only once. She reports not knowing much about her biological mother, who she said would often leave her in the care of boyfriends. She was sexually and physically abused. And after, with Adult caregivers and professionals coming in and then out of her life, some distressing or abusive experiences, and a general lack of permanency. I moved a lot when I was younger, Marie says in an interview. I was in group homes, too. About 2 of those and probably 10 or 11 foster homes. I was on like 7 different drugs. And Zoloft is an adult drug. I was on that at 8. Marie has 2 brothers and a sister on her mother's side. Sometimes she was placed in foster homes with her siblings. More often they were separated. No one really explained why she was being moved, or what was going on. She was just moved. After Marie became a teenager, her years of upheaval appeared at an end. Her foster family was going to adopt her. I really loved the family and I made a lot of friends, Marie says. The first day of the first year of high school fills many students with anxiety. Marie couldn't wait for it. She had gotten all the classes she wanted. She had a social circle. She felt like she belonged. But on the first day, a support counselor came to the school and told Marie the family had lost its foster care license. She couldn't live with them anymore. The counselor couldn't offer any more details. I pretty much just cried, Marie says. I basically had 20 minutes to pack my stuff and go. Until something more permanent could be found, Marie moved in with Shannon McQuarrie and her husband in Bellevue, a booming, high-tech suburb east of Seattle. Shannon, a real estate agent and longtime foster mom, had met Marie through meetings for kids with troubled pasts and had sensed a kindred spirit. Shannon and Marie were both kind of goofy, Shannon says. We could laugh at each other and make fun. We were a lot alike. Despite all Marie had been through, she wasn't bitter, Shannon says. She kept in touch with previous foster families. She could carry on a conversation with adults. She didn't have to be pushed out the door to school. But no matter her affection for Marie, Shannon knew they couldn't keep her, because the foster child already in their home required so much care. We were really sad that we weren't able to have her with us, Shannon says. Marie left Shannon's home after a couple of weeks to move in with Peggy Cunningham, who worked as a children's advocate at a homeless shelter and lived in Linwood, a smaller suburb about 15 miles north of Seattle. She was Peggy's first foster child. I was preparing for a baby. I had a crib and they gave me a 16-year-old, Peggy says, with a laugh. And it was fine. I have a background in mental health and I've been working with kids for a really long time. And I think the agency just thought, she can handle it. So. At first, Marie didn't want to live with Peggy. Marie was used to being around other kids. Peggy didn't have any. Marie liked dogs. Peggy had 2 cats. Our personalities didn't match at first either, Marie says. It was hard to get along. For me it seems like people read me differently than I see myself. Peggy, who had received a file 2 to 3 inches thick documenting Marie's history, was surprised at how well she was coping. Marie was into boys, drawing and music, be it rock, country, or Christian. She was very bubbly and full of energy, but she also had her moments where she could be very intense, Peggy says. Like kids most everywhere, Marie wanted to fit in. She picked out a feminine white coat with a fur collar because she thought that's what girls were supposed to wear, but then kept the coat in the closet when she realized it wasn't. Recognizing that Marie's high school wasn't a great fit, pretty cliquey, Peggy says Peggy found an alternative school that was. Marie settled in. She remained close with Shannon, who would joke that she and Peggy were raising Marie together. Shannon the fun one, let's go boating, Peggy the disciplinarian, be home by. Through friends, Marie met Jordan Schweitzer, a high school student working at a McDonald's. In time, they became boyfriend and girlfriend. She was just a nice person to have around. She was always nice to talk to, Jordan says. Marie figures her happiest years were when she was 16 and 17, and the happiest day may have been one she spent with her best friend, another high school student who was teaching Marie the fine points of camera work. I would spend hours at the beach watching the sunset go down, and that was one of my favorite things. There was a particular photo that I really liked that she took. We went to the ocean, it was like 7 o'clock at night, I don't know what we were thinking, I got in there and I jumped out and swung my hair back. Instead of finishing high school, Marie went for her GED. She was 17, starting to stay out late, worrying Peggy, creating tension between the two. In the spring of 2008, Marie turned 18. She could have stayed with Peggy, provided she abided by certain rules. But Marie wanted to set out on her own. Peggy, searching online, discovered a pilot program called Project Ladder. Launched the year before, the program was designed to help young adults who had grown up in foster care transition to living on their own. Case managers would show participants the do's and don'ts of shopping for groceries, handling a credit card, buying insurance. The rules about life, Marie says. Best of all, Project Ladder provided subsidized housing, with each member getting a one-bedroom apartment. This was a godsend, Peggy says. There were few slots, but Marie secured one. She was a little scared, but any trepidation was tempered by a sense of pride. She moved into the Alderbrook Apartments, a woodsy complex that advertises proximity to a mall and views of the Cascades. She also landed her first job, offering food samples to customers at Costco. 6 hours on her feet didn't bother her. She enjoyed chatting with people, free from pressure to sell. So many kids, institutionalized, wound up on drugs or in jail. Marie had made it through. It was just nice to be on my own and not have all the rules that I had had being in foster care, Marie says. It was just like freedom. It was awesome. The morning after the rape in Golden, Galbraith hurried to work to follow up her husband's lead. At 9:07 a.m. she sent an email to the Westminster Police Department. The subject line was pleading, sex assault similars. Westminster detective Edna Hendershot had settled into her morning with her Starbucks usual, a venti, upside down, skinny caramel macchiato. She read the email and her mind shot back 5 months, to a crisp Tuesday in August 2010. She had responded to a report of a rape at a blue-collar apartment complex in the northwest corner of her city. A 59-year-old woman told her that she had been asleep in her home when a man jumped on her back. He wore a black mask. He tied her hands. He stole her pink Sony Cybershot camera and used it to take pictures of her. Afterward, he made her take a shower. He picked up a kitchen timer and set it to let her know when she could get out. I guess you won't leave your windows open in the future, the man told the woman, who had recently been widowed. There was more. Hendershot remembered that while investigating her case, an officer had alerted her to an incident in October 2009 in Aurora, a suburb on the other side of Denver. There, a 65-year-old woman told police that she had been raped in her apartment by a man with a black scarf wrapped around his face. He tied her hands with a ribbon. He took pictures and threatened to post them on the internet. During the attack, he knocked a yellow teddy bear off a desk in her bedroom. You should get help, the woman, a house mother at a local fraternity, told the man. It's too late for that, he replied. Cops can be protective about their cases, fearing that information could be leaked that would jeopardize their investigations. They often don't know about, or fail to use, an FBI database created years ago to help catch repeat offenders. Between 1/4 to 2/3 of rapists are serial attackers, studies show. But Hendershot right away recognized the potential in collaborating and in using every tool possible. 2 heads, 3 heads, 4 heads, sometimes are better than one, right, she said. So did Galbraith. Her department was small, a little more than 40 officers serving a town of about 20,000. It only made sense to join forces. I have no qualms with asking for help, Galbraith said. Let's do what we can do to catch him. A week later, Galbraith, Hendershot and Aurora Detective Scott Burgess gathered around a conference table in the Westminster Police Department. They compared investigations. The descriptions of the attacker were similar. So, too, his methods. But there was a clincher: the woman in Galbraith's case had remained as focused as possible during her ordeal, memorizing details. She recalled the camera that the attacker had used to take photos. It was a pink Sony digital camera, a description that fit the model stolen from the apartment of the Westminster victim. Galbraith and Hendershot hadn't known each other before the meeting. But the hunt for the rapist united them. As female cops, both women were members of a sorority within a fraternity. The average law enforcement agency in America is about 13% female. Police ranks remain overwhelmingly male, often hierarchical and militaristic. But both women had found a place for themselves. They had moved up in the ranks. The two bonded naturally. Both were outgoing. They cracked fast jokes and smiled fast smiles. Galbraith was younger. She crackled energy. She would move 100 miles an hour in one direction, a colleague said. Hendershot was more experienced. She'd worked more than 100 rape cases in her career. Careful, diligent, exacting, she complimented Galbraith. Sometimes going 100 miles an hour, you miss some breadcrumbs, the same colleague noted. Their initial attempts to identify the attacker faltered. Golden police obtained a surveillance tape showing the entrance to the apartment complex where Galbraith's victim had been attacked. A fellow detective sat through more than 12 hours of blurry footage. He laboriously counted 261 vehicles and people coming and going on the night of the incident. There was one possible lead. In the pre-dawn hours, a white Mazda pickup truck appeared 10 times. Maybe it was the attacker waiting for the woman to fall asleep? But efforts to identify the vehicle's owner failed. The license plate was unreadable. As the weeks passed, the dead ends continued. Hendershot turned to the database meant to capture serial rapists by linking cases in different jurisdictions. It turned up only bad leads. Frustration grew. Someone else is going to get hurt, Galbraith worried to herself. By late January, the detectives decided they needed to broaden their scope. Hendershot asked one of her department's crime analysts to scour nearby agencies for similar crimes. The analyst turned up an incident in Lakewood, another Denver suburb, that occurred about a month before the rape in Westminster. At the time, police had labeled the case a burglary. But in fresh light, it appeared very much like a failed rape attempt, committed by an attacker who closely resembled the description of the rapist. The analyst shot Hendershot a message: "You need to come to talk to me right now." The report detailed how a 46-year-old artist had been accosted in her home by a man with a knife. He wore a black mask. He tried to bind her wrists. But when the man looked away, the woman jumped out of her bedroom window. She broke 3 ribs and punctured a lung in the 7-foot fall to the ground, but managed to escape. Investigators at the scene uncovered a few, tenuous pieces of evidence. Thunder showers had soaked the area before the attack. Police found shoe prints in the soft, damp soil outside the woman's bedroom. On a window, they found honeycomb marks. Honeycomb marks. Hendershot seized on them. Westminster crime scene investigators had discovered similar marks on the window of the victim's apartment. Hendershot asked for a comparison. The marks at the 2 crime scenes were the same. They also appeared similar to prints from a pair of Under Armour gloves that a Lakewood investigator, on a hunch, had discovered at a Dick's Sporting Goods. Galbraith checked out the footprints left at the Lakewood scene. They matched the footprints in the snow outside her victim's apartment in Golden. She sent images of the shoe prints to crimesho.com, a website that promised to move an investigation from an unidentified scene of crime shoe print to detailed footwear information in one simple step. The site, now defunct, identified the prints as having been made by a pair of Adidas ZX700 mesh shoes, available in stores after March 2005. By the end of January 2011, the detectives had connected 4 rapes over a 15-month period across Denver's suburbs. The trail started in Aurora, east of Denver, on October 4, 2009, with the 65-year-old woman. It picked up 9 months later and 22 miles to the west, when the rapist attacked the artist in Lakewood. A month after that, the 59-year-old widow was raped in Westminster, some 10 miles to the north. And then, finally, in January 2011 came the attack on the 26-year-old in Golden, about 15 miles southwest of Westminster. If you drew a map, it was almost like the rapist was circling the compass points of Denver's suburbs. Galbraith and Hendershot turned to DNA to identify the serial rapist. The detectives had thoroughly examined their crime scenes. Technicians had swabbed window panes, doorknobs, even toilet handles, anything that the attacker might have touched. But the man was familiar with the ways of law enforcement, perhaps even a cop. He knew to avoid leaving his DNA at the scene. He used wet wipes to clean up his ejaculate. He ordered the women to shower. He took their clothing and bedding with him when he left. He had been punctilious, but not perfect. The attacker had left behind the tiniest traces of himself. The technicians recovered 3 samples of so-called touch DNA, as few as 7 or 8 cells of skin that can be analyzed with modern laboratory techniques. 1 sample was collected from the kitchen timer in Westminster. A second came from the victim in Golden. And 1 came from the teddy bear in Aurora. A little before 9 on a Monday morning, 2 Linwood police detectives responded to a report of rape at the Alderbrook apartments. A couple of other officers were already there, protecting the crime scene. A K-9 officer was outside, his dog trying to pick up a scent. The detectives, SGT Jeffrey Mason and Jerry Ritgarn, found the victim, Marie, on a couch, in a blanket, crying off and on. She was accompanied by her foster mother, Peggy Cunningham, and by Wayne Nash, her case manager with Project Ladder. Marie, who had turned 18 3 months before, told police she had been talking on the phone much of the night with her friend Jordan. After finally falling asleep, she was awakened by a man with a knife and then tied up, blindfolded, gagged and raped. The man wore a condom, she believed. As for what her attacker looked like, Marie could offer few details. White man, gray sweater. The attack seemed to last a long time, Marie told police, but she couldn't say for sure. It was all a blur. Marie said that after the rapist left she had managed, with her feet, to retrieve some scissors from a cabinet's bottom drawer. She cut herself free, then tried calling Jordan. When Jordan didn't answer, Marie called her foster mother, then her upstairs neighbor, who came down to Marie's apartment and called 911. Mason, then 39, had spent his years mostly in patrol and narcotics. His longest law enforcement stint had been with a small police department in Oregon, where he served for almost 9 years and received a Medal of Valor. He was hired by Linwood in 2003, and served on a narcotics task force. He was promoted to sergeant and transferred to the Criminal Investigations Division 6 weeks before the report of Marie's assault. He had previously worked only 1 or 2 rape cases. But this investigation was his to lead. Ritgarn had been with the department for 11 years, the last 4 as a detective. He had previously worked as a technician in the aerospace industry. Before that, he had served in the Marine Corps, specializing in helicopter avionics. The Linwood Police Department had 79 sworn officers, serving a city of about 34,000 people. In 2008, Marie's case was one of 10 rape reports the department fielded. With so few, the Criminal Investigations Division didn't have a separate sex crimes unit. By the time Marie reported being assaulted, sex crime specialists had developed protocols that recognized the challenges and sensitivity of investigating rape cases. These guidelines, available to all police departments, detailed common missteps. Investigators, one guide advised, should not assume that a true victim will be hysterical rather than calm, able to show clear signs of physical injury, and certain of every detail. Some victims confuse fine points or even recant. Nor should police get lost in stereotypes believing, for example, that an adult victim will be more believable than an adolescent. Police should not interrogate victims or threaten to use a polygraph device. Lie detector tests are especially unreliable with people who have been traumatized, and can destroy the victim's trust in law enforcement. Many states bar police from using them with rape victims. Police, walking around Marie's apartment, discovered that the rear sliding glass door was unlocked and slightly ajar. It led to a back porch, with a wooden railing that was covered with dirt except one part, about 3 feet wide, where it looked like maybe someone had brushed the surface while climbing over. On the bed, officers found a shoestring used, apparently, to bind Marie. On top of a computer monitor they found a second shoestring, tied to a pair of underwear, the apparent blindfold or gag. Both laces had come from Marie's black tennis shoes, in the living room. Next to the bed was a black-handled knife. Marie said the knife was hers, that it had come from the kitchen, and was what the rapist had used to threaten her. Police found Marie's purse on the bedroom floor, her wallet on the bed, and her learner's permit, for some reason removed from her wallet, on a bedroom windowsill. Mason told Marie she needed to go to the hospital for a sexual assault examination. After Marie left, accompanied by her foster mom and case manager, the detectives helped process the scene. Looking for a condom or its wrapper, Ritgarn checked the bathroom, trash cans and a nearby hillside, but came up empty. The dog, outside, had tracked to the south, toward an office building, but was unable to lead officers to anything that might identify the rapist. At the hospital, medical staff collected more than a dozen swabs from Marie. Labs were taken for hepatitis, chlamydia, HIV. Marie received Zithromax and Suprax for possible exposure to sexually transmitted diseases, and an emergency contraceptive pill. The medical report noted abrasions to Marie's wrists and to her vagina. The bruising on her right wrist measured 6.5 centimeters, or about 2.5 inches, the one on her left, 7 centimeters. During the exam, the medical report said, Marie was alert and oriented, and in no acute distress. On the day she reported being raped, Marie phoned Shannon, her former foster mom, after getting back from the hospital. She called and said, "I've been raped," Shannon says. There was just no emotion. It was like she was telling me that she'd made a sandwich. That Marie wasn't hysterical, or even upset, made Shannon wonder if Marie was telling the truth. The next day, when Shannon saw Marie at her apartment, her doubts intensified. In the kitchen, when Shannon walked in, Marie didn't meet her gaze. That seemed very strange, Shannon says. We would always hug and she would look you right in the eye. In the bedroom, Marie seemed casual, with nothing to suggest that something horrible had happened there. Outside, Marie was on the grass, rolling around and giggling and laughing, Shannon says. And when the two went to buy new bedding, Marie's old bedding having been taken as evidence, Marie became furious when she couldn't find the same set. Why would you want to have the same sheets and bedspread to look at every day when you'd been raped on this bed set? Shannon thought to herself. Peggy, too, was mystified by Marie's demeanor. When Marie called her on that first day, before the police arrived, she was crying and I could barely hear her, Peggy says. Her voice was like this little tiny voice, and I couldn't really tell. It didn't sound real to me. It sounded like a lot of drama, too, in some ways. At the time, Peggy had new foster children, 2 sisters, both teenagers. Not long before, Marie had accompanied Peggy and the sisters and Peggy's boyfriend on a picnic. To Peggy's mind, Marie had spent the afternoon trying to get attention, so much so that Peggy now wondered if this was more of the same, only more desperate. After rushing to the apartment that morning, Peggy found Marie on the floor, crying. But it was so strange because I sat down next to her, and she was telling me what happened, and I got this. I'm a big Law and Order fan, and I just got this really weird feeling, Peggy says. It was like, I felt like she was telling me the script of a Law and Order story. Part of it was what Marie was saying. Why would a rapist use shoelaces to tie her up? And part of it was how Marie was saying it. She seemed so detached and removed emotionally. The two women who had helped raise Marie talked on the phone. Peggy told Shannon she had doubts. Shannon said she did, too. Neither had known Marie to be a liar, to exaggerate, sure, to want attention, sure, but now, both knew they weren't alone in wondering if Marie had made this up. On August 12, the day after Marie reported being raped, SGT. Mason's telephone rang. The caller related that Marie had a past history of trying to get attention and the person was questioning whether the rape had occurred, Mason later wrote. Mason's report didn't identify the caller, but the caller was Peggy. She called police to share her concerns. Mason then came to her home and interviewed her in person. When she told police of her skepticism, she asked to be treated anonymously. I didn't want it to get back to Marie, Peggy says. I was trying to be a good citizen, actually. You know? I didn't want them to waste their resources on something that might be, you know, this personal drama going on. In addition, Mason had received a tip that Marie was unhappy with her apartment. Maybe she was making up the rape to get moved to a new one. On August 13, Marie met with Mason at the Linwood police station and turned in a written statement, describing what happened. The statement was only one page. But to Mason, there was one critical passage. Marie wrote that the attacker said she could untie herself once he was gone. After he left, I grabbed my phone, which was right next to my head, with my mouth, and I tried to call Jordan back. He didn't answer, so I called my foster mom. She came right away. I got off the phone with her and tried to untie myself. This didn't square with what Marie had previously told Mason. Before, she told the detective she had tried calling Jordan after cutting the laces. In this written statement, she described calling him while still tied up. Later that day, Mason talked to Ritgarn, his fellow detective, and said that based on Marie's inconsistencies, and based on what he had learned from Peggy and Jordan, he now believed Marie had made up the story. The fear of false rape accusations has a long history in the legal system. In the 1600s, England's Chief Justice, Matthew Hale, warned that rape is an accusation easily to be made and hard to be proved, and harder to be defended by the party accused. Judges in the U.S. read the so-called Hale warning to juries until the 1980s. But most recent research suggests that false reporting is relatively rare. FBI figures show that police annually declare around 5% of rape cases unfounded, or baseless. Social scientists examining police records in detail and using methodologically rigorous standards cite similar, single-digit rates. The next morning, Mason went to Jordan's home to interview him. Jordan told the detective that he and Marie had stopped dating a couple months back but remained good friends. He said nothing about doubting Marie's story, according to Mason's written summary. But he did say Marie had told him, when she tried calling him that morning, she had used her toes, because she was tied up. Later that day, August 14, 3 days after Marie reported being raped, Mason called Marie, to ask if they could meet. He said he could come and pick her up, to take her to the police station. Am I in trouble? Marie asked the detective. On February 9, 2011, more than a dozen cops and agents from the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation gathered in a briefing room at the Westminster Police Station to discuss the state of the investigation. The news was not great. After a 5-week crush, there were few leads and no suspects. The analysis of the touch DNA produced mixed results. The samples narrowed the field of suspects to males belonging to the same paternal family line. But there was not enough genetic material to identify a single individual. Thus the results couldn't be entered into the FBI's nationwide DNA database to check for a match to a suspect. Galbraith was hopeful. At least it was concrete now. The same person was at work. "It's huge," she said. But not enough. As the meeting drew to a close, a young crime analyst from the Lakewood Police Department stood up. She had conducted a search for any reports of suspicious vehicles or prowlers within a quarter-mile of the Lakewood victim's home for the previous 6 months. She had turned up something. But she didn't know if it was important. 3 weeks before the attempted rape in Lakewood, a woman had called police late in the evening to report a suspicious pickup truck parked on the street with a man inside. Police checked it out, but the man was gone. The officer filed a brief report on the vehicle. What had attracted the analyst's attention was the location of the pickup. It was parked half a block from the Lakewood victim's house, by an empty field adjacent to her backyard. The pickup was a 1993 white Mazda. It was registered to a Lakewood man named Mark Patrick O'Leary. The investigation instantly turned urgent. Could the detectives connect O'Leary's Mazda with the blurry image of the white Mazda in the surveillance footage from Golden? Aaron Hassel, the detective on the Lakewood case, raced back to his office. Lakewood patrol cars had cameras that automatically took pictures of every license plate they passed. The result was a searchable database of thousands of tag numbers indexed by time and location. Hassel typed in the license plate number from the Lakewood report, 935 VHX. He got a hit. A Lakewood patrol car had snapped a picture of O'Leary standing by his white Mazda in the driveway of his house only 2 hours after the August attack on the widow in Westminster. Hassel transmitted the image to Galbraith. Carefully, she compared O'Leary's white Mazda to the surveillance tape. One freeze frame showed that her white Mazda had a broken passenger side mirror. So, too, did O'Leary's truck. Both vehicles had ball hitches on the back. Both had smudges on the back in the same place, perhaps a bumper sticker that had been torn off. "That's our guy," Galbraith said. Hendershot discovered the Lakewood patrol car had snapped its picture as O'Leary was headed to a nearby branch of the Colorado Department of Motor Vehicles. DMV records showed O'Leary sat for a driver's license mugshot about 4 hours after the Westminster attack. The photo showed a 6'1" man with hazel eyes. He was 32 years old and 220 pounds. He wore a white t-shirt. The physical description closely matched the descriptions provided by the victims. And the Westminster widow had told Hendershot that her attacker wore a white t-shirt during her assault. Hendershot did not want to be too hasty. "I'm encouraged, I'm excited," she said. "But I haven't made my decision yet, yay, we've got the guy." Over the next 24 hours, more than a dozen investigators threw their collective effort and experience into finding out everything possible about O'Leary. O'Leary had no criminal record. He was not a registered sex offender. He had served in the army. Galbraith and her husband David once again faced each other on the couches in their living room. They used laptops to search for any references to O'Leary, each using a different search engine. Before long, David stumbled onto something. O'Leary had purchased a pornography website in September 2008. They wondered whether it contained photos of his victims. The investigators decided to try to get a sample of O'Leary's DNA. Though the degraded DNA lifted from the crime scenes could not definitively match O'Leary's DNA, it could show that a male from his family line had most likely committed the crime. If detectives could eliminate O'Leary's male relatives, they could place O'Leary at the scene of the crimes with a high degree of certainty. "We still have to make that definitive identification," Hendershot said. On the morning of Friday, February 11, FBI agents were surveilling O'Leary's house. It was a small, single-story home with gray siding half a block from a gas station, an auto body shop and a carniceria in a beat-down neighborhood. A low chain-link fence surrounded it. Tall, winter bare trees towered above the roof. Just after noon, the agents saw a woman and a man who looked like O'Leary leave. They tailed the pair to a nearby restaurant, and watched them eat. When they finished, the agents raced in. They grabbed the drinking cups from the table. The rims would have traces of his DNA. While the agents were following the man believed to be Mark O'Leary, another FBI agent knocked on the door of the home. He planned to install a surveillance camera nearby and wanted to make sure that nobody was around. Unexpectedly, a man came to the door. He looked like Mark O'Leary. Confused, the agent fell back on a practiced ruse. He told the man he was canvassing the neighborhood to warn of a burglar in the area. The man introduced himself. He was Mark O'Leary. His brother, Michael O'Leary, had just left to get lunch with his girlfriend. O'Leary thanked the officer for the information and closed the door. Michael's appearance was confounding. The investigators hadn't known that Michael lived with his brother, or that he looked so similar. They decided to run Michael O'Leary's DNA, collected from the restaurant glass, against the DNA found at the crime scenes. Analysts at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation got the samples. Usually, a DNA analysis took months. But in this case, they worked through the night. By 2 p.m. on Saturday, they had a result. The DNA from the cup matched the DNA collected from the victims. An O'Leary man was responsible. But which one? Galbraith ruled out the brother's father. He was too old and lived in a different state. But investigators could not yet rule out Michael as a suspect. It was possible that Michael had committed the rapes. Or even that Michael and Mark had worked together. They needed more information. Galbraith hastily typed up a search warrant to enter the brothers' home. It was dark outside when she finished. She called the judge who was on duty for the weekend. He insisted on a fax. Galbraith rushed to a Safeway near her house to send the warrant. The judge signed it at 10 p.m. on Saturday. She knew exactly what she was looking for. She trusted her victim's memory. The dark mark on his leg. She emailed a crime analyst at another police department, "I so want to see this guy's leg." Bad. In SGT Mason's experience, when someone asked if they were in trouble, almost always, they were. When Mason, accompanied by Detective Ritgarn, went to pick up Marie at about 3:30 p.m., they found her outside her apartment, sitting on the grass. The three went to the Linwood police station, where the detectives escorted Marie to a conference room. From what Mason wrote up later, he wasted little time confronting Marie, telling her there were inconsistencies between her statements and accounts from other witnesses. Marie said she didn't know of any discrepancies. But she went through the story again, only this time, saying she believed the rape had happened instead of saying it for certain. Tearfully, she described her past, all the foster parents, being raped when she was 7, getting her own place and feeling alone. Ritgarn told Marie that her story and the evidence didn't match. He said he believed she had made the story up, a spur-of-the-moment thing, not something planned out. He asked if there was really a rapist running around the neighborhood that the police should be looking for. No, Marie told him, her voice soft, her eyes down. Based on her answers and body language, it was apparent that Marie was lying about the rape, Ritgarn later wrote. Without reading Marie her rights, "You have the right to an attorney, you have the right to remain silent." The detectives asked Marie to write out the true story, admitting she had lied, admitting, in effect, that she had committed a crime. She agreed, so they left her alone for a few minutes. On the form she filled in her name, address and social security number, and then she wrote, in part, "I was talking to Jordan on the phone that night about his day and just about anything. After I got off the phone with him, I started thinking about all things. I was stressed out and I also was scared living on my own. When I went to sleep, I dreamed that someone broke in and raped me." When the detectives returned, they saw that Marie's new statement described the rape as a dream, not a lie. "Why didn't you write that you made the story up?" Ritgarn asked. Marie, crying, said she believed the rape really happened. She pounded the table and said she was pretty positive. "Pretty positive or actually positive?" Ritgarn asked. "Maybe the rape happened and I blacked it out," Marie said. What do you think should happen to someone who would lie about something like this? Ritgarn asked Marie. I should get counseling, Marie said. Mason returned to the evidence. He told Marie that her description of calling Jordan was different from what Jordan had reported. Marie, her face in her hands, looked down. Then her eyes darted back and forth as if she was thinking of a response. The detectives doubled back to what she had said before about being stressed, being lonely and, eventually, Marie appeared to relax. She stopped crying. She even laughed a little. She apologized and agreed to write another statement, leaving no doubt it was a lie. I have had a lot of stressful things going on and I wanted to hang out with someone and no one was able to, so I made up this story and didn't expect it to go as far as it did. I don't know why I couldn't have done something different. This was never meant to happen. This statement appeared to satisfy the detectives. Ritgarn would later write, based on our interview with Marie and the inconsistencies found by SGT. Mason, in some of the statements we were confident that Marie was now telling us the truth, that she had not been raped. To Marie, it seemed the questioning had lasted for hours. She did what she always did when under stress. She flipped the switch, as she called it, suppressing all the feelings she didn't know what to do with. Before she confessed to making up the story, she couldn't look the two detectives, the two men, in the eye. Afterward, she could. Afterward, she smiled. She went into the bathroom and cleaned up. Flipping the switch was a relief and it would let her leave. The next day, Marie told Wayne Nash, her case manager at Project Ladder, that the police didn't believe her. Recognizing the jeopardy she was in, she said she wanted a lawyer. The Project Ladder managers instead reached out to SGT. Mason. He told them the evidence didn't support Marie's story, and that she had taken her story back. But now, Marie wouldn't give. On August 18, 1 week after she reported being raped, she met with the two Project Ladder managers and insisted she had signed the recantation under duress. The three then went to the police station so Marie could recant her recantation, that is, tell detectives that she had been telling the truth the first time. While the program managers waited outside, Marie met with Ritgarn and another officer. Ritgarn asked Marie what was going on. Marie said she really had been raped and began to cry, saying she was having visions of the man on top of her. She wanted to take a lie detector test. Ritgarn told Marie that if she took the test and failed, she would be booked into jail. What's more, he would recommend that Project Ladder pull her housing assistance. Marie backed down. The police officers walked her downstairs, where the Project Ladder representatives asked if she had been raped. Marie said no. After leaving the police station, Marie learned that she still wasn't through. There was something else she had to do. The Project Ladder managers told Marie that if she wanted to stay in the program, if she wanted to keep her subsidized apartment, she would have to confess to someone else. Later that day a meeting was called at the housing complex, with all of Marie's peers gathered in a circle. Marie, as directed, told her fellow participants in Project Ladder that she had lied about being raped. They didn't need to worry, she told the group. There was no one out there who had hurt her and no one who might hurt them next. If there was sympathy in the room, Marie sensed it from only one person, the young woman to her right. The rest was awkward, excruciating silence. After the meeting, Marie started walking to a friend's place. On her way, she crossed a bridge. She considered jumping. Probably the only time I just wanted to die in my life, she says. She called a friend and said, "Please come get me before I do something stupid." Afterward, Marie hurled her phone over the side. Later that month, there was a final surprise. Marie got a letter, notifying her that she was wanted in court. She had been charged with false reporting, punishable by up to a year in jail. The criminal citation was signed by SGT. Mason. Afterward, the paperwork went to a small law firm that Linwood had hired to prosecute misdemeanors. For Mason, his decision to file the citation required no complicated calculus. He was certain Marie had lied. The police had spent a lot of resources chasing that lie. The law said her lie was a crime. Really, it was as simple as that. There are no firm statistics on how often police arrest women for making false rape reports, nor on how often prosecutors take such cases to court. Nobody collects such data. But leading law enforcement organizations urge caution in filing such charges. The International Association of Chiefs of Police and the FBI stress the need for a thorough investigation before discounting a report of rape. Cops must work as hard to prove a falsehood as they do to prove a truth. In practice, many police departments will pursue charges against women only in extreme circumstances, say, in a highly public case where a suspect's reputation has suffered, or where the police have expended considerable investigative resources. This reluctance stems from the belief that in rape cases, the biggest problem is not false reporting, but no reporting. Only about 1/5 to 1/3 of rapes get reported to police, national surveys show. One reason is that women fear police won't believe them. Within days of reporting being raped, Marie had quit her job at Costco, unable to stand there, looking at people, lost in her head. Now, her losses mounted. Project Ladder gave her a 9 p.m. curfew and doubled the number of times she had to meet with staff. The media wrote about Marie being charged, without identifying her. The Seattle Post-Intelligencer headline read, "Police, Linwood rape report was a hoax." Marie's best friend from high school, the one who had taught her photography and had taken that picture of her emerging from the surf, created a web page that called Marie a liar, with a photo from Marie's MySpace page, with police reports, with Marie's full name. Alerted to the site, Marie went into a frenzy, trashing her apartment. Marie stopped going to church. "I was mad at God," she says. She lost interest in photography. She feared going outdoors. "One night I did try to walk to the store by myself and felt like I hallucinated someone following me," she says. "It freaked me out. I didn't even get a half-mile from my house. I ran home." At home she avoided the bedroom, choosing to sleep on the couch with the lights on. "I went into this dark hole," she says. Self-esteem gave way to self-loathing. She started smoking, drinking, gaining weight. For Marie, this was a familiar drill, one she could trace to her years of being abused as a kid, and to her years in foster care, bouncing from home to home and school to school. Shut down. Hold it in. Act like nothing bad had happened, like nothing ever affected her. Because she craved normalcy, she would bury the hurt. Neither Peggy nor Shannon abandoned her, but things weren't the same. Marie knew that both had doubted her story, even before the police had. For Marie, Shannon's home had long provided an escape or respite. Marie and Shannon would walk in the woods, or take out the boat, then, at day's end, crash in Shannon's home. Now, fearful he could become the target of a wrongful accusation, Shannon's husband decided it would be best if Marie no longer spent the night. "When you become a foster parent, you're open to that," Shannon says. It fell to Shannon to break the news. Delivering it crushed her. Receiving it crushed Marie. In early October, less than 2 months after Marie was charged with false reporting, a 63-year-old woman reported being raped inside her condominium in Kirkland, east of Seattle. The stranger wore gloves. He held a knife. He tied the woman up with her own shoelaces. He took pictures and threatened to post them on the internet. For the last 2 or 3 months, the woman told police, she felt as if someone had been following her. Shannon saw an account of the attack on the television news and was taken aback. Her father had been the chief of police in Kent, south of Seattle. She grew up with police, trusted police, knew how the police worked. She went to her computer, looked up the number, and called immediately to alert police in Kirkland to Marie's story, to advise them of all the parallels. Shannon called Marie and suggested she also contact the Kirkland police. Marie never did. I was just too scared, Marie says. She'd gone through so much already. She couldn't bring herself to meet with the police again and say anything more. But she did go online and look up what happened to the woman in Kirkland. When she read the story, she cried. A Kirkland detective eventually called Shannon back. Based on Shannon's tip, Kirkland investigators had reached out to their Linwood counterparts and had been told the Linwood victim was no victim, the story had been made up. One of the detectives working the Kirkland case was Audra Weber. She remembers calling the Linwood detectives twice and being told they didn't believe Marie's account. I just kind of trusted their judgment, in terms of it's their case, they know the details and I don't, Weber says. But she remembers being kind of shocked to learn that they had charged Marie. She let it go and hung up, thinking, okay, I hope that works out for you guys. At 8:15 a.m., Galbraith knocked on O'Leary's door. Police. Search warrant. Open the door, she shouted repeatedly. 7 cops stood behind her, pressed against the house, their guns drawn. After a pause, O'Leary opened the door. He looked confused and shocked as he stepped out into the bright winter sun. 2 dogs, a small pit bull and a Shar-Pei, tumbled out ahead of him. He wore a gray hoodie, baggy gray sweatpants and gray slip-on house shoes. He was alone. Galbraith pulled him to the side and patted him down. When she got to his legs, she raised his pant leg to look. There it was, on O'Leary's left calf, a dark birthmark the size of a large chicken egg. It was him. He was the rapist. Galbraith flashed a quick thumbs up. As an FBI agent confronted him, O'Leary immediately invoked his right to an attorney. Galbraith had maneuvered herself to stand behind O'Leary. At 8:35 a.m., she handcuffed him. You're under arrest for burglary and sexual assault which occurred in the city of Golden on January 5, 2011, she told him. O'Leary was put in a patrol car and transported to the Jefferson County Jail. She was wearing new boots that day. Whenever she looked at them in the future, she would remember catching O'Leary. For Galbraith, it was important to be the one who made the arrest. I wanted to see the look on his face, I guess, she said. And for him to know that we figured you out. The search of the home validated the detective's investigation. Investigators found a pair of Adidas ZX700 shoes in O'Leary's closet. The treads matched the footprints in the snow in Golden and outside the window in Lakewood. They discovered a pair of Under Armour gloves with a honeycomb pattern. In the bathroom was a black head wrap, tied to serve as a mask. He was military, so he was very organized, Galbraith said. This was the cleanest house I've ever searched. It was so organized, we were like, oh, thank God. The victims' accounts were also borne out. Most had described a white man with green or hazel eyes, about 6 feet tall, weighing about 200 pounds. They talked about being tied up. They mentioned that he had stolen their underwear. In O'Leary's house, investigators turned up a black Ruger .380 caliber pistol, a pink Sony Cybershot camera and a large backpack, along with wet wipes and lubrication. Hidden inside a piece of stereo equipment in his closet, detectives found a collection of women's underwear. Trophies. That night, Hendershot drove to break the news to her victim, the 59-year-old widow in Westminster. The woman had lost her husband to cancer the previous year. She had no family nearby. She was still emerging from the mental and physical suffering she endured during the attack. Hendershot met her at a Denny's restaurant. She found her in a back corner, eating dinner alone. I walked in, and she was super happy to see me, and I told her. I mean, I get shiver bumps thinking about it, just even now, Hendershot said. I told her, I said, it's over. It's over. We have him. By early March, a forensic computer specialist cracked into files that O'Leary had stored on his hard drive. He found a folder called Girls and Pictures that O'Leary had taken of his victims in Golden and Westminster. Galbraith recognized them by sight. But then Galbraith stumbled across an image of a woman she didn't recognize. It was a young woman far younger than the Colorado victims, perhaps a teenager. The pictures showed her looking terrified, bound, and gagged on a bed. Galbraith felt sick. How would she identify her? How would she find justice for her? After looking through the images, she found an answer. It was a picture of the woman's learner's permit, placed on her chest. It had her name. And it had her address. Linwood, Washington. He arrived in the pre-dawn hours, then waited outside her apartment, outside her bedroom, listening to her on the phone, waiting for her to fall asleep. The night was dry, letting him settle in. The wall was thin, letting him hear her voice. A couple of times he left his position, for just a while, for fear of being spotted lingering. He liked trees, for the cover they provided, and the Alderbrook apartments had plenty of them. Apartments didn't offer the privacy of a house, but still, there were advantages. All those windows, for one thing. And all those sliding glass doors ridiculously easy to pick, when they weren't left unlocked, which so often they were. She wasn't his type, not really. He'd realized that before while peeping into her bedroom. But he spent so much time hunting, that's what he called it, hunting, hundreds of hours, maybe even 1,000, that he conditioned himself to incorporate as many women as possible, young or old, into his fantasies. That way his work wouldn't be wasted. He had prowled before and broken into women's homes before, but following through was another matter. He had learned from past failures. One time, a guy walked in as he stood there, mask on, outside the bedroom door of the woman he planned to rape, so now, he did painstaking surveillance, peeking in windows, breaking in beforehand, gathering information. Years later, detectives would find notes on his cell phone from his surveillance of another target, his word, that detailed which room she was in and when, what lights were off or on, which windows and blinds were opened or closed, whether her boyfriend was there or gone. BF in PJS, game over, he wrote in one night's entry. He would rifle a target's personal documents. He would learn her date of birth and license plate number. He would watch her watching TV. And at the hunt's end, before he committed, he would take a final pass through the home, or what he called pre-combat inspection, to make sure there weren't any weapons within the target's reach. At a little before sunrise, he heard the phone conversation end. He waited a little longer, letting the silence stretch out, then climbed over the railing and slipped through the unlocked sliding glass door. For the next half hour or so, while she slept, he got ready while talking himself into following through. He had first spotted her a couple of weeks before, through a window, while lurking outside her apartment. He had since broken into her place twice, both times through that same glass door. He had a term for what he was about to do, rape theater. Deviant fantasies had gripped him since he was a kid, way back to when he had seen Jabba the Hutt enslave and chain Princess Leia. Where do you go when you're 5 and already thinking about handcuffs? He would ask himself. He was only 8 the first time he broke into a home. It was such a rush. He had broken into more than a dozen homes since. Now he was 30, an Army veteran infantry, 2 tours in South Korea, who had enlisted in the reserves, only he hadn't appeared for duty in months. In the kitchen, he went to the knife block and removed a black-handled blade from the top row, far left. In the living room, he removed the laces from her black tennis shoes and put the shoes back. One detective later wrote in a report, the shoes were lying next to each other near the end of the couch and the bedroom door, on the solace as if placed there, not disturbed. He was just being neat and orderly, the way he was with everything. He threaded one of the shoelaces through a pair of underwear. Then he walked to the bedroom. Around 7 a.m., he stood in her bedroom doorway, holding, at shoulder height, a knife in his left hand. He watched as she awoke. "Turn away," he told Marie, and she did. "Roll over onto your stomach, he told her. She did, and then he straddled her, putting the knife near her face. Put your hands behind your back, he told her. She did. He bound her wrists and he covered her eyes. He stuffed cloth into her mouth to muffle any sound. That was an interesting conversation you were having, he said, letting her know that he had been there, listening, waiting. You should know better than to leave the door unlocked, he told her. Roll back over, he told her, and she did, and then he raped her, and while he raped her he ran his gloved hands over her. He put her learner's permit on her chest and took pictures of her. When he was finished, he said that if she told the police, he would post the photos online so that her kids, when she had kids, could see them. He took out the gag and removed the blindfold, telling her to avert her eyes and to keep her head in the pillow. One of the last things he said was that he was sorry. He said he felt stupid, that it had looked better in his head. He left the room, and walked to the front door, and he was gone. O'Leary pleaded guilty to 28 counts of rape and associated felonies in Colorado. On December 9, 2011, almost a year after his arrest, O'Leary was sentenced to 327.5 years in prison for the Colorado attacks, the maximum allowed by law. He is currently housed in the Sterling Correctional Facility in the barren, remote northeastern corner of Colorado. He will never be released. In an interview with police after his conviction, O'Leary recounted his attacks in detail. He described the feeling after raping one elderly victim. It was like I'd just eaten Thanksgiving dinner, he said. He let spill some lessons for law enforcement. He boasted of the countermeasures he'd taken to avoid getting caught. He knew that the Army had a sample of his DNA. So he took steps to avoid leaving any traces of genetic material. He also realized police departments often did not communicate. So he deliberately committed each rape in a different jurisdiction. The 5 other attacks, 1 in Washington, 4 in Colorado, all came after the attack on Marie. If Washington had just paid attention a little bit more, I probably would have been a person of interest earlier on, O'Leary said. Working from Colorado, Galbraith not only linked O'Leary to the rape in Linwood, Washington, but to the rape in nearby Kirkland. She made the connection by working with a Washington state criminal analyst to search a database for unsolved cases similar to O'Leary's crimes. She then found the Kirkland victim's name on O'Leary's computer, attached to an encrypted file. O'Leary pleaded guilty in both of the Washington cases. In June 2012, he was sentenced to 40 years for the rape in Kirkland and to 28.5 years for the rape of Marie in Linwood. After O'Leary was linked to Marie's rape, Linwood Police Chief Stephen Jensen requested an outside review of how his department had handled the investigation. In a report not previously made public, SGT. Greg Rinta, a sex crime supervisor with the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, wrote that what happened was nothing short of the victim being coerced into admitting that she lied about the rape. That Marie recanted wasn't surprising, Rinta wrote, given the bullying and hounding she was subjected to. The detectives elevated minor inconsistencies common among victims into discrepancies, while ignoring strong evidence the crime had occurred. As for threatening jail and a possible withdrawal of housing assistance if Marie failed a polygraph, these statements are coercive, cruel, and unbelievably unprofessional, Rinta wrote. I can't imagine any justification for making these statements. Jensen also ordered an internal review, which was similarly damning. Mason's judgment was unduly swayed by Peggy's phone call. The detective's second interview with Marie was designed to elicit a confession of false reporting. The false reporting charge arose from a self-imposed rush. Despite the review's tough language, no one in the Linwood Police Department was disciplined. In a recent interview, Steve Ryder, the current commander of Linwood's Criminal Investigations Division, called Marie's case a major failing that has left members of the department with a profound sense of regret, knowing that she went through that brutal attack and then we told her she lied. That's awful. We all got into this job to help people, not to hurt them. Linwood SGT. Rodney Cohnheim said of Marie, she was victimized twice. SGT. Mason is now back in narcotics, in charge of a task force. Interviewed in the same room where he had confronted Marie 7 years before, he said, "It wasn't her job to try to convince me. In hindsight, it was my job to get to the bottom of it and I didn't." Marie's case led to changes in practices and culture, Ryder said. Detectives receive additional training about rape victims. Rape victims get immediate assistance from advocates at a local health care center. Investigators must have definitive proof of lying before doubting a rape report, and a charge of false reporting must now be reviewed with higher UPS. "We learned a great deal from this. And we don't want to see this happen to anybody ever again," Ryder said. Rit Garn, who left the Linwood Police Department before O'Leary's arrest, declined to be interviewed for this story. So did Zachar and Thomas, the law office that handled the prosecution of Marie on Linwood's behalf. In 2008, Marie's case was one of 4 labeled unfounded by the Linwood police, according to statistics reported to the FBI. In the 5 years from 2008 to 2012, the department determined that 10 of 47 rapes reported to Linwood police were unfounded, 21.3%. That's 5 times the national average of 4.3% for agencies covering similar-sized populations during that same period. Ryder said his agency has become more cautious about labeling a case unfounded since Marie. "I would venture to say we investigate our cases a lot more vigorously than many departments do," he said. "Now, we're extra careful that we get the right closure on it." 2.5 years after Marie was branded a liar, Linwood police found her, south of Seattle, and told her the news. Her rapist had been arrested in Colorado. They gave her an envelope with information on counseling for rape victims. They said her record would be expunged. And they handed her $500, a refund of her court costs. Marie broke down, experiencing, all at once, shock, relief and anger. Afterward, Shannon took Marie for a walk in the woods, and told her, "I'm so sorry I doubted you." Marie forgave, immediately. Peggy, too, apologized. She now wishes she had never shared her doubts with police. "Because I feel that if I would have shut my mouth, they would have done their job," she says. Marie sued the city and settled for $150,000. A risk management decision was made, a lawyer for Linwood told the Herald in Everett, Washington. Marie left the state, got a commercial driver's license and took a job as a long-haul trucker. She married, and in October she and her husband had their second child. She asked that her current location not be disclosed. Before leaving Washington to restart her life, Marie made an appointment to visit the Linwood police station. She went to a conference room and waited. Rit Garn had already left the department, but Mason came in, looking like a lost little puppy, Marie says. He was rubbing his head and literally looked like he was ashamed about what they had done. He told Marie he was sorry, deeply sorry, Marie says. To Marie, he seemed sincere. Recently, Marie was asked if she had considered not reporting the rape. No, she said. She wanted to be honest. She wanted to remember everything she could. She wanted to help the police. So nobody else would get hurt, she said. They'd be out there searching for this person who had done this to me. Story 2. The untold story of the world's biggest diamond heist. Leonardo Notarbartolo strolls into the prison visiting room trailing a guard as if the guy were his personal assistant. The other convicts in this Eastern Belgian prison turn to look. Leonardo Notarbartolo strolls into the prison visiting room trailing a guard as if the guy were his personal assistant. The other convicts in this Eastern Belgian prison turn to look. Notarbartolo nods and smiles faintly, the laugh lines crinkling around his blue eyes. Though he's an inmate and wears the requisite white prisoner jacket, Notarbartolo radiates a sunny Italian charm. A silver Rolex peeks out from under his cuff, and a vertical strip of white soul patch drops down from his lower lip like an exclamation mark. In February 2003, Notar Bartolo was arrested for heading a ring of Italian thieves. They were accused of breaking into a vault 2 floors beneath the Antwerp Diamond Center and making off with at least $100 million worth of loose diamonds, gold, jewelry, and other spoils. The vault was thought to be impenetrable. It was protected by 10 layers of security, including infrared heat detectors, Doppler radar, a magnetic field, a seismic sensor, and a lock with 100 million possible combinations. The robbery was called the heist of the century, and even now the police can't explain exactly how it was done. The loot was never found, but based on circumstantial evidence, Notar Bartolo was sentenced to 10 years. He has always denied having anything to do with the crime and has refused to discuss his case with journalists, preferring to remain silent for the past 6 years. Until now. Notar Bartolo sits down across from me at one of the visiting room's 24 small rectangular tables. He has an intimidating reputation. The Italian anti-mafia police contend he is tied to the Sicilian mob, that his cousin was tapped to be the next Capo dei Capi, the head of the entire organization. Notar Bartolo intends to set the record straight. He puts his hands on the table. He has had 6 years to think about what he is about to say. I may be a thief and a liar, he says in beguiling Italian accented French. But I am going to tell you a true story. It was February 16, 2003, a clear, frozen Sunday evening in Belgium. Notar Bartolo took the E19 motorway out of Antwerp. In the passenger seat, a man known as Speedy fidgeted nervously, damp with sweat. Notar Bartolo punched it, and his rented Peugeot 307 sped south toward Brussels. They hadn't slept in 2 days. Speedy scanned the traffic behind them in the side view mirror and maintained a tense silence. Notar Bartolo had worked with him for 30 years. They were childhood buddies, but he knew that his friend had a habit of coming apart at the end of a job. The others on the team hadn't wanted Speedy in on this one. They said he was a liability. Notar Bartolo could see their point, but out of loyalty, he defended his friend. Speedy could handle it, he said. And he had. They had executed the plan perfectly, no alarms, no police, no problems. The heist wouldn't be discovered until guards checked the vault on Monday morning. The rest of the team was already driving back to Italy with the gems. They'd rendezvous outside Milan to divvy it all up. There was no reason to worry. Notar Bartolo and Speedy just had to burn the incriminating evidence sitting in a garbage bag in the back seat. They were accused of breaking into the Antwerp Diamond Center's super secure vault and stealing $100 million in diamonds, gold, and jewelry. The loot was never found, but their trash was. Notar Bartolo pulled off the highway and turned onto a dirt road that led into a dense thicket. The spot wasn't visible from the highway, though the headlights of passing cars fractured through the trees. Notar Bartolo told Speedy to stay put and got out to scout the area. He passed a rusty, dilapidated gate that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Second World War. It was hard to see in the dark, but the spot seemed abandoned. He decided to burn the stuff near a shed beside a small pond and headed back to the car. When he got there, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Speedy had lost it. The contents of the garbage bag was strewn amongst the trees. Speedy was stomping through the mud, hurling paper into the underbrush. Spools of videotape clung to the branches like streamers on a Christmas tree. Israeli and Indian currency skittered past a half-eaten salami sandwich. The mud around the car was flecked with dozens of tiny, glittering diamonds. It would take hours to gather everything up and burn it. I think someone's coming, Speedy said, looking panicked. Notar Bartolo glared at him. The forest was quiet except for the occasional sound of a car or truck on the highway. It was even possible to hear the faint gurgling of a small stream. Speedy was breathing fast and shallow. The man was clearly in the midst of a full-blown panic attack. Get back in the car, Notar Bartolo ordered. They were leaving. Nobody would ever find the stuff here. The job was done. Location along the E19 motorway north of Brussels, where Speedy dumped the garbage bag of evidence. Patrick Pease and Ajim de Brooker arrived at the Diamond Center the next morning. They had just received a frantic call: the vault had been compromised. The subterranean chamber was supposed to be one of the most secure safes in the world. Now the foot-thick steel door was ajar, and more than 100 of the 189 safe deposit boxes had been busted open. Pease and de Brooker were stunned. The floor was strewn with wads of cash and velvet-lined boxes. Pease stepped on a diamond-encrusted bracelet. It appeared that the thieves had so much loot, they simply couldn't carry it all away. Pease and de Brooker lead the Diamond Squad, the world's only specialized diamond police. Their beat, the labyrinthine Antwerp Diamond District. 80% of the world's rough diamonds pass through this 3-square block area, which is under 24-hour police surveillance and monitored by 63 video cameras. About $3 billion worth of gem sales were reported here in 2003, but that's not counting a hidden world of handshake deals and off-ledger transactions. Business relationships follow the ancient family and religious traditions of the district's dominant Jewish and Indian dealers, known as diamantaries. In 2000, the Belgian government realized it would require a special type of cop to keep an eye on things and formed the squad. Pease and de Brooker were the first hires. De Brooker called headquarters, asking for a nationwide alert. The Antwerp Diamond Center had been brazenly robbed. Then he dialed Securilink, the vault's alarm company. "What is the status of the alarm?" he asked. "Fully functional," the operator said, checking the signals coming in from the Diamond Center. "The vault is secure." "Then how is it that the door is wide open and I'm standing inside the vault?" De Brooker demanded, glancing at the devastation all around him. He hung up and looked at Pease. They were up against a rare breed of criminal. The Diamond Center's vault after the robbery. About 18 months earlier, in the summer of 2001, Leonardo Notarbartolo sipped an espresso at a cafe on Hoveniersstraat, the Diamond District's main street. It was a cramped, narrow place with a half-dozen small tables, but from the corner by the window Notarbartolo could look out on the epicenter of the world's diamond trade. During business hours, Hasidic men wearing broad-brimmed hats hurried past with satchels locked to their wrists. Armored cars idled tensely while burly couriers with handguns wheeled away small black suitcases. There were Africans in bright blue suits, Indian merchants wearing loops around their necks, and bald Armenians with reading glasses pushed up on their mottled heads. Billions of dollars in diamonds pass by the cafe's window. During the day, they travel from office to office in briefcases, coat pockets, and off-the-shelf rollies. At night, all those gems are locked up in safes and underground vaults. It's one of the densest concentrations of wealth in the world. It's also a thief's paradise. In 2000, Notarbartolo rented a small office in the Diamond Center, one of the area's largest buildings. He presented himself as a gem importer based in Turin, Italy, and scheduled meetings with numerous dealers. He bought small stones, paid cash, dressed well, and cheerfully mangled the French language. The dealers probably never knew that they had just welcomed one of the world's best jewel thieves into their circle. By his own account, Notarbartolo had pulled off dozens of major robberies by 2000. It wasn't just about the money anymore. He stole because he was born to be a thief. He still remembers every detail of his first robbery. It was 1958. He was 6. His mother had sent him out for milk, and he came back with 5,000 lira, about $8. The milkman had been asleep, and young Leo rifled through his drawers. His mother beat him, but it didn't matter. He had found his calling. In elementary school, he filched money from his teachers. As a teenager, he stole cars and learned to pick locks. In his 20s, he devoted himself to the study of people, tracking jewelry salesmen around Italy for weeks just to understand their habits. In his 30s, he began to assemble teams of thieves, each with their own specialty. He knew lock-picking experts, alarm aces, safe crackers, guys who could tunnel under anything, and a man who could scale the sleek exteriors of office buildings. Each job brought a different mix of thieves into play. Most, including Notar Bartolo, lived in or near Turin, and the group came to be known as the School of Turin. Notar Bartolo's specialty was charm. Acting the part of the jolly jeweler, he was invited into offices, workshops, and even vault rooms to inspect merchandise. He would buy a few stones and then, a week or a month later, steal the target's entire stock in the middle of the night. Antwerp provided a wealth of opportunity and a good place to fence hot property. A diamond necklace stolen in Italy could be dismantled and its individual gems sold for cash in Antwerp. He came to town about twice a month, stayed a few days at a small apartment near the diamond district, then drove home to his wife and kids in the foothills of the Alps. When he had stolen goods to sell, he dealt with only a few trusted buyers. Now, as he finished his espresso, one of them, a Jewish dealer, came in and sat down to chat. "Actually, I want to talk to you about something a little unusual," the dealer said casually. "Maybe we could walk a little." They headed out, and once they were clear of the district, the dealer picked up the conversation. His tone had changed, however. The casualness was gone. "I'd like to hire you for a robbery," he said. "A big robbery?" The agreement was straightforward. For an initial payment of 100,000 euros, Notar Bartolo would answer a simple question: could the vault in the Antwerp Diamond Center be robbed? He was pretty sure the answer was no. He was a tenant in the building and rented a safe deposit box in the vault to secure his own stash. He viewed it as the safest place to keep valuables in Antwerp. But for 100,000 euros, he was happy to photograph the place and show the dealer how daunting it really was. So he strolled into the diamond district with a pen poking out of his breast pocket. At a glance, it looked like a simple highlighter, but the cap contained a miniaturized digital camera capable of storing 100 high-resolution images. Photography is strictly limited in the district, but nobody noticed Notar Bartolo's pen cam. He began his reconnaissance at the police surveillance booth on the Skupstraat, a street leading into the center of the district. Behind the booth's bulletproof glass, 2 officers monitored the area. The 3 main blocks of the district bristled with video cameras. Every inch of street and sky appeared to be under watch. The booth also contained the controls for the retractable steel cylinders that are deployed to prevent vehicular access to the district. As Notar Bartolo walked past, he began taking pictures. He headed toward the Diamond Center itself, a gray, 14-story, fortress-like building on the south end of the district. It had a private security force that operated a nerve center located at the entrance. Access was blocked by metal turnstiles, and visitors were questioned by guards. Notar Bartolo flashed his tenant ID card and breezed through. His camera captured crisp images of everything. The 3-ton steel vault door. He took the elevator, descending 2 floors underground to a small, claustrophobic room, the vault antechamber. A 3-ton steel vault door dominated the far wall. It alone had 6 layers of security. There was a combination wheel with numbers from 0 to 99. To enter, 4 numbers had to be dialed, and the digits could be seen only through a small lens on the top of the wheel. There were 100 million possible combinations. Power tools wouldn't do the trick. The door was rated to withstand 12 hours of non-stop drilling. Of course, the first vibrations of a drill bit would set off the embedded seismic alarm anyway. The door was monitored by a pair of abutting metal plates, one on the door itself and one on the wall just to the right. When armed, the plates formed a magnetic field. If the door were opened, the field would break, triggering an alarm. To disarm the field, a code had to be typed into a nearby keypad. Finally, the lock required an almost impossible to duplicate foot-long key. During business hours, the door was actually left open, leaving only a steel grate to prevent access. But Notar Bartolo had no intention of muscling his way in when people were around and then shooting his way out. Any break-in would have to be done at night, after the guards had locked down the vault, emptied the building, and shuttered the entrances with steel roll gates. During those quiet midnight hours, nobody patrolled the interior. The guards trusted their technological defenses. Notar Bartolo pressed a buzzer on the steel grate. A guard upstairs glanced at the video feed, recognized Notar Bartolo, and remotely unlocked the steel grate. Notar Bartolo stepped inside the vault. It was silent. He was surrounded by thick concrete walls. The place was outfitted with motion, heat, and light detectors. A security camera transmitted his movements to the guard station, and the feed was recorded on videotape. The safe deposit boxes themselves were made of steel and copper and required a key and combination to open. Each box had 17,576 possible combinations. Notar Bartolo went through the motions of opening and closing his box and then walked out. The vault was one of the hardest targets he'd ever seen. Notar Bartolo leans toward me in the Belgian prison and asks if I have any questions so far. It is a rare break in his fast-moving monologue. There is a sense of urgency. He is allotted only 1 hour of visiting time per day. You're telling me that the heist was organized by an Antwerp diamond dealer, I say. Bravo, he replies, smiling. What about your cousin? His smile disappears. Notar Bartolo was born in Palermo, Sicily, and members of his extended family have long been dogged by accusations of mafia connections. Those accusations reached a crescendo last year when anti-mafia police arrested Notar Bartolo's cousin Benedetto Capizzi, claiming he was about to become the new leader of the Sicilian mafia. Notar Bartolo says the Italian authorities traveled to Belgium soon after the heist to question him about Capizzi's possible role in the robbery. If there is an organized crime link, Notar Bartolo might be inventing a story about the Jewish diamond dealer to distract attention from what really happened. Notar Bartolo scoffs at this idea and insists that his cousin had nothing to do with the heist. The reality, Notar Bartolo says, is that he thought the vault was impregnable. He didn't believe it could be robbed until the dealer went to extraordinary lengths to prove him wrong. The target? The Antwerp Diamond Center vault was protected by 10 layers of security. The door. 1. Combination dial, 0 to 99. 2. Keyed lock. 3. Seismic sensor, built in. 4. Lock steel grate. 5. Magnetic sensor. 6. External security camera. The vault. 7. Keypad for disarming sensors. 8. Light sensor. 9. Internal security camera. 10. Heat/motion sensor, approximate location. Illustration, Joe McKendry. It took 5 months for the diamond dealer to call back after Notar Bartolo told him the heist was impossible. He had even given him the photographs to prove it. Notar Bartolo thought that would be the end of it, but now the dealer wanted to meet at an address outside Antwerp. When Notar Bartolo arrived, the dealer was waiting for him in front of an abandoned warehouse. I want to introduce you to some people, he said, unlocking the battered front door. Inside, a massive structure was covered with black plastic tarps. The dealer pulled back a corner and they ducked underneath. At first, Notar Bartolo was confused. He seemed to be standing in the vault antechamber. To his left, he saw the vault door. He was inside an exact replica of the Diamond Center's vault level. Everything was the same. As far as Notar Bartolo could tell, the dealer had reconstructed it based on the photographs he had provided. Notar Bartolo felt like he had stepped into a movie. Inside the fake vault, 3 Italians were having a quiet conversation. They stopped talking when they saw the dealer and Notar Bartolo. The dealer introduced them, though Notar Bartolo refuses to reveal their names, referring to them only by nicknames. The genius specialized in alarm systems. According to the dealer, he could disable any kind of alarm. You can disable this? Notar Bartolo asked, pointing at the replica vault. I can disable most of it, the genius said with a smile. You're going to have to do one or two things yourself, though. The tall, muscular man was the monster. He was called that because he was monstrously good at everything he did. He was an expert lockpicker, electrician, mechanic, and driver and had enormous physical strength. Everybody was a little scared of him, which was another reason for the nickname. The King of Keys was a quiet older man. His age set him apart from the others. He looked like somebody's grandfather. The diamond dealer said that the wizened locksmith was among the best key forgers in the world. One of his contributions would be to duplicate the nearly impossible to duplicate foot-long vault key. Just get me a clear video of it, the man told Notarbartolo. I'll do the rest. That's not so easy, Notarbartolo pointed out. The King of Keys shrugged. That wasn't his problem. Don't worry, the genius said. I'll help. In September 2002, a guard stepped up to the vault door and began to spin the combination wheel. It was 7 a.m. He was right on schedule. Directly above his head and invisible behind the glare of a recessed light, a fingertip-sized video camera captured his every move. With each spin, the combination came to rest on a number. A small antenna broadcast the image. Nearby, in a storage room beside the vault, an ordinary-looking red fire extinguisher was strapped to the wall. The extinguisher was fully functional, but a watertight compartment inside housed electronics that picked up and recorded the video signal. When the guard finished dialing the combination, he inserted the vault's key. The video camera recorded a sharp image of it before it disappeared inside the keyhole. He spun the handle, and the vault door swung open. Thursday morning, February 13, 2003. 2 days before the heist. The thud-thud-thud of a police helicopter beat over a convoy of police cars escorting an armored truck through the heart of Antwerp. They blew past posters of Venus Williams. She was due in town to compete in the Proximus Diamond Games tennis tournament. The escorts bristled with firepower. They belonged to a special diamond delivery protection unit, and each cop carried a fully automatic weapon. Their cargo, De Beers' monthly shipment of diamonds, worth millions. De Beers is the world's largest diamond mining company. In 2003, it controlled 55% of the global diamond supply and operated mines in South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, among others. The rough, unpolished gems were flown to London, where they were divided and placed in 120 boxes, one for each official De Beers distributor, many of which were headquartered in Antwerp. Every month, Antwerp's share of the boxes was flown into Belgium and transferred to a Brinks armored truck. Once the truck's doors slammed shut, the convoy sped away, sirens wailing. The vehicles rocketed past the guard gate at the entrance of the district, and the giant metal cylinders rose out of the ground behind them, blocking any further automotive access. The armed escorts fanned out on foot around the armored truck to form a perimeter. No one was allowed near the vehicle. The doors swung open, and the boxes were quickly carried through an unremarkable entrance in the middle of the block. It was payday. The diamond district was flush. Notarbartolo was buzzed into the vault the next day, Friday, February 14, the day before the robbery. He was alone. In his jacket pocket, he carried a can of women's hairspray. Notarbartolo used women's hairspray to temporarily disable the vault's combined heat/motion sensor. A security camera recorded his movements. Police would later watch the footage, but the guard had gotten used to the Italian's frequent visits and wasn't paying attention. Notarbartolo stepped away from the safe deposit boxes and pulled out the aerosol can. With a quick, practiced circular movement, he covered the combined heat/motion sensor with a thin coat of transparent, oily mist. The vault was momentarily filled with the smell of a woman's hair. It was a simple but effective hack. The oily film would temporarily insulate the sensor from fluctuations in the room's temperature, and the alarm went off only if it sensed both heat and motion. Still, it was hard to guess how long the trick would work. Once the monster was in the vault, he had to install the sensor bypass before his body heat penetrated the film. He might have 5 minutes, he might have less. Nobody knew for sure. Venus Williams smashed the ball cross-court with a yelp, overwhelming her leggy Slovakian opponent. It was Saturday night, and Williams was dominating the semifinals of the Diamond Games, an event that hyped Antwerp's predominant position in the gem world. Many of the city's diamondaries watched as Williams beat down the Slovak and moved one step closer to winning a tennis racket encrusted with nearly $1 million worth of stones. Across town, the Diamond District was deserted. Notar Bartolo drove his rented grey Peugeot 307 past the city's soot-covered central train station and turned onto Pelikanstraat, a road that skirted the district. He pulled to the curb, and the monster, the genius, the king of keys, and Speedy stepped out carrying large duffel bags. The king of keys picked the lock on a run-down office building, and they disappeared through the door. It was a little past midnight. The genius led them out the rear of the building into a private garden that abutted the back of the Diamond Center. It was one of the few places in the district that wasn't under video surveillance. Using a ladder he had previously hidden there, the genius climbed up to a small terrace on the second floor. A heat-sensing infrared detector monitored the terrace, but he approached it slowly from behind a large, homemade polyester shield. The low thermal conductivity of the polyester blocked his body heat from reaching the sensor. He placed the shield directly in front of the detector, preventing it from sensing anything. The balcony was now safe. While the rest of the team scrambled up, the genius disabled an alarm sensor on one of the balcony's windows. One by one, the thieves climbed through the window, dropped into a stairwell, and descended to the darkened vault antechamber. They covered the security cameras with black plastic bags and flipped on the lights. The vault door stood imposingly before them. The building was quiet, no alarms had been triggered. The police never determined how the men had entered the building. The genius pulled a custom-made slab of rigid aluminum out of his bag and affixed heavy-duty double-sided tape to one side. He stuck it on the two plates that regulated the magnetic field on the right side of the vault door and unscrewed their bolts. The magnetic plates were now loose, but the sticky aluminum held them together, allowing the genius to pivot them out of the way and tape them to the antechamber wall. The plates were still side by side and active. The magnetic field never wavered, but they no longer monitored the door. Some 30 hours later, the authorities would marvel at the ingenuity. The genius used this custom-made slab of aluminum to reposition the magnetic field away from the vault door. Next, the king of keys played out a hunch. In Notar Bartolo's videos, the guard usually visited a utility room just before opening the vault. When the thieves searched the room, they found a major security lapse. The original vault key was hanging inside. The king of keys grabbed the original. There was no point in letting the safe manufacturers know that their precious key could be copied, and the police still don't know that a duplicate was made. The king of keys slotted the original in the keyhole and waited while the genius dialed in the combination they had gleaned from the video. A moment later, the genius nodded. The monster turned off the lights. They didn't want to trigger the light detector in the vault when the door opened. In the darkness, the king of keys turned the key and spun a four-pronged handle. The bolts that secured the door retracted and it swung heavily open. Speedy ran up the stairwell. It was his job to stay in touch with Notar Bartolo, but there was no cell phone reception down in the vault. Upstairs, he got a signal and dialed his old friend. "We're in," he said and hung up. Notar Bartolo put his phone back on the dashboard. He was sitting in the Peugeot and could see the front of the Diamond Center a block and a half away. His police scanner was quiet. He took a sip of cold coffee and waited. In the antechamber, the king of keys deftly picked the lock on the metal grate. He shuffled backward as the monster propped the grate open with 2 cans of paint he found in the storeroom. Like the rest of the team, the monster wore plastic gloves. The police would find no prints on the cans. It was now up to him to disable the remaining systems. The monster oriented himself in the darkness at the vault entrance. The only sound was the steady breathing of the others behind him. His body was already projecting heat into the vault. The hairspray on the infrared sensor wouldn't last. Every second he was there would raise the ambient temperature. He had to move quickly but keep his heart rate low. The monster bypassed the vault security system's main inbound and outbound wires and then covered this light sensor with tape, rendering it useless. As he'd practiced in the warehouse, he strode exactly 11 steps into the middle of the room, reached for the ceiling, and pushed back a panel. He felt the security system's main inbound and outbound wires. An automatic electric pulse constantly shot into the room and back out along these wires. If any of the sensors were tripped, the circuit would break. When a pulse shot into the room, it expected an answer. If it didn't get one, it activated the alarm. With his hands over his head, the monster used a tool to strip the plastic coating off the wires. It was a delicate task. One slip could cut through, instantly breaking the circuit and tripping the alarm. The police would later discover stripped wires in the ceiling and guess that the thieves considered cutting them, only to lose their nerve. But Notarbartolo says that the monster knew exactly what he was doing. Once the copper wires were exposed, he clipped a new, pre-cut piece of wire between the inbound and outbound cables. This bridge rerouted the incoming electric pulse over to the outbound wire before the signal reached the sensors. It no longer mattered what happened further down the line. The sensors were out of the loop. It was now safe for the others to enter. Still, the men were cautious. They blinded the heat/motion detector with a styrofoam box, covered the light detector with tape, and then set to work. The King of Keys unloaded a homemade, hand-cranked drill and fitted it with a thin shaft of metal. He jammed the shaft into one of the locks and cranked for about 3 minutes until the lock broke, snapping open the box. The guys took turns yanking the contents out. Since they had memorized the layout of the vault in the replica, they worked in the dark, turning on their flashlights only for split seconds, enough to position the drill over the next box. But in those muffled flashes, they could glimpse their duffel bags overflowing with gold bars, millions in Israeli, Swiss, American, European, and British currencies, and leather satchels that contained the mother lode, rough and polished diamonds. They resisted the urge to examine their haul. They were running out of time. By 5:30 a.m., they had opened 109 boxes. A tamped-down giddiness pervaded the dark vault, but they had to stop. The streets would fill with people soon, and they needed to transfer their bags into Notarbartolo's car. Speedy relayed the message to him. They were coming out. It took almost an hour for the team to haul the bags up the stairs, pass by the infrared sensor, lower the loot down the ladder, and gather in the hallway of the decrepit office building. Notarbartolo idled at the curb while on the phone with Speedy. A bus came and went, and then the street was empty. Now, he hissed. In the pre-dawn half-light, the 4 men raced out of the building. They jammed the bags in the car, slammed the doors, and headed off on foot for Notarbartolo's apartment. He put the car in gear and slowly pulled away. In half an hour, they were huddled around the bags in the apartment. The monster unzipped one and pulled out a leather satchel. It was time to celebrate. He opened the satchel and looked up, bewildered. It was empty. He took out another. It was also empty. A wave of anxiety swept the room. They unzipped all the other duffel bags and rifled through the satchels. More often than not, there was nothing in them. Something had gone wrong. The diamonds should have been there. "We've been set up," Notarbartolo said. Notarbartolo stepped into a scalding hot shower while the others made salami sandwiches in the kitchen. He needed some clarity. The fatigue was weighing on him. In the weeks preceding the heist, he had seen many of the satchels in the offices of the Diamond Aries, and they were always filled with inventory. He expected the total take to exceed $100 million. Now they were looking at a fraction of that, probably about $20 million. Notarbartolo reflected on his interactions with the diamond dealer, and a thought flashed through his mind: maybe the dealer wasn't operating alone. If he tipped off a group of his fellow merchants, they could have pulled their inventory out of the vault before the heist. Each could then claim that their gems were stolen and collect the insurance while secretly keeping their stones. Most had safes in their offices. They could have simply kept the stock there. Bartolo realized that the heist he had spent so much time planning might have actually been part of an elaborate insurance scam. He shut off the water. A half hour earlier he was a king. Now he felt like a pawn. Speedy and Bartolo were on the E19 heading out of Antwerp. It was 6 o'clock on Sunday evening. Bartolo settled in for the 10-hour drive back to Turin. The garbage bag filled with incriminating evidence sat in the back seat. Bartolo planned to stop in France and burn it, leaving no trace of the crime. But Speedy was having trouble. His face was ashen, and his eyes darted madly at the cars around him. Finally, after only 20 minutes on the road, he snapped. "I can't do the drive," he said. The guy was melting down. Bartolo told him to take it easy. He'd drop him at the train station in Brussels if that's what he wanted. It might actually be nicer to do the trip without his friend driving him crazy. "We can't take the garbage into Brussels," Speedy stammered. The city was crawling with cops. Maybe they would be looking for them. They couldn't run the risk. They had to drop the bag immediately. "Pull off up here," he said abruptly from the passenger seat. "This is a ridiculous time to be having a panic attack," Bartolo muttered. "Just pull off," his friend snapped. Bartolo took the exit and surveyed the darkened surroundings. "There's a dirt road," Speedy said, peering into a forest. "It'll be perfect. August Van Camp likes weasels." The 59-year-old retired Belgian grocer had two. He called them Mickey and Minnie, and he enjoyed sending them down holes in the forest. Typically, a rabbit came rocketing out the other end. It was a lot of fun. In 1998, he bought a narrow strip of forest alongside the E19 motorway. It was about a 5-minute drive from his house, and if you ignored the sound of cars hurtling past at 80 miles an hour, it was a pretty 12 acres of trees with a gurgling stream. There were also a lot of holes with rabbits in them. But because it adjoined the highway, Van Camp found a lot of garbage. The local teenagers once decided to have a party there and burned down a little hut he'd built. It made him fume with anger. When he found garbage, he phoned the police, who had gotten used to his calls. A typical conversation. "The kids have made a mess on my land again." "I am sorry to hear that, Mr. Van Camp. I demand that you send someone to investigate. We will pass along your request." Van Camp rarely heard back. The garbage Van Camp found on his property that led to Bartolo's arrest. While hunting one morning Monday, February 17th, to be exact, Van Camp was incensed to find yet another pile of junk in the underbrush. After a flash of pique that made him puff out his cheeks, throw up his arms, and wonder what the world was coming to, he knelt down and glared at the refuse. He wanted to be able to describe to the cops what he had to put up with. There was videotape strewn all over the place. A wine bottle rested near a half-eaten salami sandwich. There were also some white envelopes printed with the words Diamond Center, Antwerp. Van Camp's irritation increased. "Kids," he grumbled. At home, he punched in the number for the police and asked to lodge a complaint. The officer listened as Van Camp tallied the mess. When Van Camp mentioned Diamond Center envelopes, the officer broke in. "What was that?" he said. "Antwerp Diamond Center envelopes," Van Camp sputtered. This time, the police came running. By mid-afternoon, a half-dozen detectives swarmed the forest, painstakingly gathering the garbage and collecting stray gems. Van Camp watched with satisfaction. The police were finally treating his litter situation with the proper respect. Within hours, the trash began to fill the evidence room at the Diamond Squad headquarters in Antwerp. A member of the squad bent over the clear plastic bags, looking for immediate clues. A pile of torn paper seemed promising. It didn't take long to reassemble the pieces like a jigsaw puzzle. It was an invoice for a low-light video surveillance system. The buyer, Leonardo Notarbartolo. Notarbartolo's invoice for a low-light video surveillance system. Back at Van Camp's property, another detective knelt among the thorny brambles and peered at a small, jagged piece of paper poking out of the mud. He carefully lifted it free and held it up to the light. It was a business card that bore the address and phone number of Elio Dionario, an Italian electronics expert tied to a series of robberies. Notarbartolo has consistently refused to identify his accomplices, but all evidence indicates that Dionario is the genius. The lab techs also bagged a half-eaten salami sandwich. They found antipasto Italiano salami packaging nearby and sent it along to Diamond Squad headquarters. 4 days later, the detectives executed a search warrant on the apartment Notarbartolo rented in Antwerp. In a cupboard, they found a receipt from a local grocery store for antipasto Italiano salami. The receipt had a timestamp. A detective drove to the grocery and asked the manager to rewind his closed-circuit television to 12:56 p.m. on Thursday, February 13. When the video came to a halt and snapped into focus, there was an image of a tall, muscular Italian purchasing salami. His name, Ferdinando Fanato, the man most likely to be the monster. On Monday, about 36 hours after the job was completed, the team of thieves reassembled at a bar in Adro, Italy, a small town about 50 miles northeast of Milan. They had agreed to meet the diamond dealer there and divide the loot. The dealer would get a third for financing the operation and putting the team together. The others would split the rest. They had anticipated a haul in the tens of millions each. Now they were looking at roughly $3 million per man. It was still a lot of money, but they couldn't help feeling they'd been played. Everybody had a lot of questions for the dealer. Hour after hour, he didn't arrive. Notarbartolo was already uneasy about what had happened in the forest. He knew he had made a mistake. He should have turned around after he dropped off Speedy at the train station and gone back to burn the garbage. It was an embarrassing oversight, but what really irked him was that he had vouched for his friend, and the guy had cracked. They waited at the bar until closing, drinking espressos and then beer. The dealer never showed. On Thursday night, Notarbartolo ate dinner with his family at home outside of Turin. He tried to pretend that everything was normal. As usual, his 3-year-old granddaughter played with his cell phone and made him laugh. He momentarily forgot his worries. His biggest problem was that he needed to go back to Belgium. The rental car was due in Antwerp the next day. The plan had always been to return it and show his face at the Diamond Center. That way, if the cops were looking for tenants who'd disappeared, he wouldn't be on the list. It would also give him an opportunity to clean his apartment more thoroughly. He told his family that he'd be leaving early the next morning. His wife decided to come along. She hadn't seen much of him lately. They could even have a nice dinner party with some friends from the Netherlands. The next morning, as the Notarbartolos blew through the Swiss Alps, the police surrounded their home in Italy. Acting on the surveillance system invoice discovered on Van Camp's land, the Belgian diamond detectives had asked the Italian police to search Notarbartolo's house. His 24-year-old son, Marco, was there and refused to open the front door. He frantically dialed his father's cell phone while the police smashed the door open. In Notarbartolo's jacket pocket, his phone flashed but made no sound. His granddaughter had accidentally turned off the ringer the night before. Marco called his mother's phone. It was turned off. He tried his dad's phone repeatedly. It just rang and rang. Unaware, Notarbartolo sped toward Antwerp. Leonardo Notarbartolo was part of a 5-man team behind the heist of the century. Photo courtesy Leonardo Notarbartolo. As Notarbartolo drove back to Belgium, Pease and De Brooker wondered whether they'd ever catch the thieves. They could be anywhere by now: Brazil, Thailand, Russia. It never occurred to the detectives that one of the robbers would walk right back into the district. But that's exactly what Notarbartolo did. While one of his friends from the Netherlands waited on the street outside the Diamond Center, Notarbartolo waved at the security guard and dropped in to collect his mail. The guard knew that the police were investigating Notarbartolo and phoned the building manager, who immediately called the detectives. When the police arrived, they found Notarbartolo chatting with the building manager and began peppering him with questions. The friend took off as Notarbartolo stalled for time, pretending to have trouble understanding French and claiming that he couldn't remember the exact address of his own apartment. He just knew how to walk there. "Let's go then," P said and loaded the Italian into a car. Eventually, Notarbartolo pointed out the apartment. As the police car pulled to the curb, Notarbartolo's wife and the friends who'd come for dinner stepped out of the building. They were loaded down with bags and one carried a rolled-up carpet. Another minute and they would have been gone. The police took everyone into custody. The bags contained critical evidence. The police dug out a series of prepaid SIM cards that were linked to cell phones used almost exclusively to call three Italians: Elio Di Onoraio, aka the Genius, Ferdinando Fanato, alias the Monster, and the person most likely to be Speedy, an anxious, paranoid man named Pietro Tavano, a longtime associate of Notarbartolo's. On the night of the heist, a cell tower in the Diamond District logged the presence of all three, plus Notarbartolo. During that time, Tavano stayed in constant contact with Notarbartolo. The day Notarbartolo was arrested, Italian police broke open the safe at his home in Turin. They found 17 polished diamonds attached to certificates that the Belgian diamond detectives traced back to the vault. More gems were vacuumed out of the rolled-up carpet from Notarbartolo's Antwerp apartment. The Belgian courts came down hard. They found Notarbartolo guilty of orchestrating the heist and sentenced him to 10 years. With the cell phone records and the peculiarly precise salami sandwich evidence, the Belgian detectives persuaded French police to raid the home of Fanato's girlfriend on the French Riviera. They retrieved marked $100 bills that the detectives say belonged to one of the Diamond Center victims. Legal proceedings dragged on, but Fanato was finally arrested in Italy in November 2007 and is serving a 5-year sentence there. When questioned by police in Italy, Di Onoraio admitted that he had installed security cameras in Notarbartolo's office but denied any involvement in the crime. Nonetheless, his DNA was found on some adhesive tape left in the vault. He was extradited to Belgium in November 2007 to begin a 5-year sentence. The high-strung Pietro Tavano is serving a 5-year sentence in Italy for the crime. He has refused to allow his attorney to make any statements on his behalf. A fifth thief has never been identified, though police know of his existence via cell phone records and DNA traces. The King of Keys was never apprehended. On January 4, 2009, I see Notarbartolo for the last time. Over the past 14 weeks, we have met 7 times in the prison visiting room, and yet questions remain. Was $100 million stolen as the police estimate, or just $20 million as Notarbartolo insists? Does it make sense that the heist was part of a larger insurance scam, or is Notarbartolo's story a decoy to throw suspicion on others? Perhaps Notarbartolo's cousin, the Mafia Don, was behind the whole thing. Whatever the truth, where is the loot now? The murky nature of the diamond trade makes it difficult to get clear answers. For instance, Detective De Brooker says that 3/4 of the business is done under the table. Since there were roughly $25 million in legitimate claims at the time of the heist, he calculated that at least another $75 million in goods was stolen. That brought the total value of the heist to about $100 million. If Notarbartolo's insurance scam theory is correct, it went down like this: the dealers who were in on it removed their goods, both legal and illegal, from the vault before the heist and then filed claims on the legitimate gems. Denise Oliver, the adjuster who investigated the robbery for insurers, calls this the double whammy. These dealers would have gotten the insurance payouts and kept their stock. The $20 million found by the thieves belonged to traders not in on the scam. Or, there was no insurance scam. The thieves actually found $100 million in the vault, and Notarbartolo has spun a story to cloud the true origins of the heist. Regardless of which theory is correct, there is agreement that the thieves got away with millions that were never recovered. Notar Bartolo refuses to talk about what happened to the goods, adding that it is something best discussed once he is out of prison. In the meantime, his share may very well be waiting for him, hidden somewhere in the foothills of the Italian Alps. Story 3. The True Crime of Dorothy Jane Scott. In May 1980, Dorothy Jane Scott, a 32-year-old single mother from Anaheim, California, received a series of terrifying phone calls. An anonymous male voice whispered, "I'm going to kill you." Dorothy dismissed it as a prank until the calls persisted. The stalker knew details about her life, her work, even her son. Police had no leads. The night of the abduction. On May 28, 1980, Dorothy drove two co-workers to the hospital after one suffered a spider bite. When they returned to the parking lot, her car was gone. Then, suddenly, it reappeared, headlights blazing, engine roaring, and rammed toward them. A shadowy figure leaped out, grabbed Dorothy, and sped off. Her co-workers screamed, but it was too late. The taunting calls continue. For 4 years, Dorothy's family received calls from her killer. He'd whisper, "I killed Dorothy. I have her." Then, in August 1984, a gruesome discovery: Dorothy's charred remains were found in an abandoned lot. She'd been murdered shortly after her abduction. The unmasked horror. The killer was never caught. But investigators believe Dorothy knew him, someone who watched her, entered her life, and hid in the shadows like a ghost. Some theorize he was inside her home before, lurking in closets, leaving no trace, just like the text in your prompt. "I'm in the closet. I see you." Dorothy's case remains unsolved. The Killer's Game, a true crime nightmare. 4 years after Dorothy Jane Scott's disappearance, her family endured psychological torture. The anonymous caller didn't stop with just one taunt, he kept playing his sick game. The Phantom Caller. Dorothy's mother, Vera, began receiving calls in the dead of night. A man's voice, eerily calm, would say, "I killed Dorothy. She's rotting in the hills." Then silence. Police traced the calls, but they came from payphones near the Scott family home. The killer was watching them. A ghoulish confession. In 1984, a man claiming to be Dorothy's killer called a local newspaper. He described her murder in graphic detail, including how he burned her body. Investigators were stunned, only the killer would know these things. But before they could trace him, he vanished. Was it someone she knew? Dorothy's case had all the hallmarks of a personal vendetta. She had recently broken up with a jealous ex-boyfriend, but he had an alibi. A co-worker had been obsessed with her, but police cleared him. Some theorized a serial killer like the still-at-large original Night Stalker, Ear/Ons, but no evidence linked him. The closet connection. One detail haunted investigators: before she vanished, Dorothy told friends she felt like someone was inside her house. Items went missing. Doors unlocked themselves. Once, she woke up to her closet door slightly open when she knew she'd closed it. Just like in your original prompt. "I'm in the closet. I see you." A killer who got away. Dorothy's case remains unsolved. No arrests. No justice. Just a family left with whispers in the dark. The Phantom Callers, when killers taunt from the shadows. Dorothy Jane Scott's case wasn't isolated. History is filled with predators who tormented victims and investigators with phone calls, letters, and even digital messages long after their crimes. The Night Caller, the murder of Carla Walker, 1974. 17-year-old Carla Walker was kidnapped from a parking lot in Fort Worth, Texas, while her boyfriend was beaten unconscious. 2 days later, her body was found. Then, the calls started. A man believed to be her killer phoned Carla's family multiple times, sometimes breathing heavily, other times laughing. He once told her father, I'm the one who killed your daughter. I'll kill again. Despite extensive investigations, Carla's murder went unsolved for 46 years until DNA finally identified her killer in 2021, Glenn Samuel McCurley, a now 78-year-old former mechanic. The BTK killer's twisted games. Dennis Rader, the BTK, bind, torture, kill, strangler, terrorized Wichita, Kansas, for decades. But what made him even more terrifying was his obsession with communication. He sent taunting letters to police and media, including crime scene photos. He once asked in a letter, "How many do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper?" After years of silence, he resurfaced in 2004, sending a floppy disk that led to his arrest. Rader's need for attention was his downfall, but many killers never slip up. The digital stalkers, modern-day phantom callers. Today, predators don't need payphones, they have the internet. The cartel troll who ordered a murder. In 2020, a Twitch streamer received a DM, "We have your address. We're outside." Moments later, gunshots rang out in her yard. It was a swatting prank, but it could have been deadly. The Snapchat stalker. In 2017, a 14-year-old girl was lured by a man who hacked her friend's account, sending, "Come outside. I'm here." She was assaulted but survived. The smart home terror. Multiple cases exist of hackers accessing home security cameras, speaking through baby monitors, or even unlocking doors remotely. The whisper in the dark. Years turned to decades. The phone calls stopped. The leads dried up. Dorothy Jane Scott's case grew colder, buried under mountains of unsolved files. But in 2023, an anonymous letter arrived at the Anaheim Police Department. It contained a faded Polaroid of Dorothy, alive but terrified, her wrists bound. A single sentence, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "I kept her with me until the end." Forensic analysis revealed traces of skin cells on the paper. The DNA matched a former janitor who had worked near Dorothy's office in 1980, a man who died in a car crash 2 weeks after sending the letter. In his basement, police found Dorothy's purse, still holding her ID. A closet lined with newspaper clippings about her case. A tape recorder, containing one final message in a raspy whisper. "You never checked the closet, did you?" Case closed. Story 4. How a group of high school kids from a sleepy beach town in California became criminal masterminds. Dave Strither * could see it through binoculars, the sails ghostly against the water. He was sitting on an exposed cliff overlooking the Pacific. It was dark, and the beach was deserted for 50 miles in both directions. This was the Lost Coast, a vast swath of rugged, uninhabited, magnificently forested Northern California, the kind of place that made you understand why people have always been drawn to the Golden State. Dave chose the spot for landfall precisely because it was so empty. He and his team needed secrecy. The sailboat was laden with contraband, 4,000 pounds of Thai stick pot, the latest in marijuana commerce, a product as potent as it was valuable, which Dave and his crew, a team of smugglers called the Coronado Company, would unload and sell for millions of dollars. Once Dave made visual contact, his team got on the radios, "Offshore vessel, please identify. This is Red Robin." Finally. Smuggling always involves waiting, but Red Robin, the code name for a ship called the Pai Nui, was months overdue, and Dave's nerves were frayed. The company, as its members called it, was already a successful and sophisticated operation, importing Mexican pot by the ton, hugging the coast in fishing boats from as far south as Sinaloa. But this was a new type of gig, crossing the Pacific in a double-mast ketch. There were more variables, more opportunities for error. The Pai Nui had run out of gas before it even reached the international date line. Then, under sail, she was becalmed in the doldrums. And then she disappeared. "Red Robin, come in," Dave had said into his radio 1,000 times, in a daily attempt to reach the boat. He set up a radio watch, 500 feet above the ocean, for a better line of sight. The beauty of single sideband radio was that you could communicate halfway around the world, coordinating, as the company liked to do, with your fleet at designated hours on Zulu time. The problem with single sideband, besides that it wasn't secure, and anyone could listen, was that there wasn't much bandwidth. Dave and the others would eavesdrop on conversations in dozens of languages, hoping to hear the captain of the Painui. Back in September, it was pleasant to be perched on a palisade covered in redwoods, taking in the panoramic view, drinking a beer, tweaking the dial, watching the ocean go from silver to teal to green to blue in the late afternoon. By late December, however, everyone was cold and jumpy. But now, just before Christmas, their ship had finally come in. Dave and his team snapped into action. Everyone was practiced and drilled. That was the company's style. They were a tight, coordinated unit, most of them friends who grew up together in Coronado, a secluded little beach town on a peninsula off the coast of San Diego. A decade earlier, they had been classmates at Coronado High. Some of them were surfers and would bring small bales of pot across the border after surfing trips to Mexico. A half-decade later, the Coronado Company was the largest smuggling outfit on the West Coast, on its way to becoming a $100 million empire, one the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration would later call the most sophisticated operation of its kind. These kids were the best in the business, James Conklin, a retired DEA special agent, says about the group he tracked for years. They were ahead of their time. They operated almost like a military unit. The crux of the business was the offload. The battle was won or lost on the beach. Everyone had their role. Dave ran field strategy. Harlan Fincher, who had a knack for equipment, was the logistics manager. Al Sweeney, a hobbyist photographer and silk screener in high school, was the crack forger. Grease Monkey Don Kidd was the chief mechanic. Alan Logie, a one-time motorcycle racer, was the flamboyant wheelman. Ed Otero, a great swimmer and athlete, provided muscle. Bob Lahodney, a handsome charmer whose 22-carat bot chain signaled some mystical time spent in Thailand, had made the company's Asian supply connection. Lance Weber, who started the whole thing, was a fearless nut whom everyone called the Wizard on account of his thaumaturgical ways with engineering, especially the boat motors he rigged to run at smuggler speeds. At the center of it all was Lou Viller. A former Spanish teacher, Lou had taught some of the guys back at Coronado High. Lance originally brought Lou along for his language abilities. It helped that he was a smooth talker. But when he got a look at all that money, Lou discovered an instinct for business. He organized the company into a visionary outfit, with himself as the kingpin. It was Lance's idea to buy the DUKW, a 31-foot, six-wheeled, World War II-era amphibious landing craft that served as the audacious centerpiece of the operation, allowing the company to drive right into the water and dock at sea with the sailboat. Lou had thought this was crazy. Oh sure, why not use Zeppelins, but after some research, Dave convinced Lou to approve the purchase of the 7.5-ton vehicle, which the crew had stashed in a barn near the tiny delta of Juan Creek. Dave directed the boat south of the creek, where the beach, as expected, was deserted. On the occasions when civilians wandered too close, they were intercepted by Dave, dressed as a park ranger, who told them that the area was the site of a wilderness reclamation project and off-limits to civilians. Lance went down the coast to Fort Bragg, 20 miles to the south, to get eyes on the local Coast Guard station. Company lookouts codenamed Nova for north and Saturn for south took position out on the Pacific Coast Highway. At midnight everyone radioed in with a round of affirmatives. The coast, as they say, was clear. "Let's get the duck rolling," Dave said over the COMM. With Ed and Don in the cockpit, the duck pulled out of the barn, drove down the Pacific Coast Highway to the beach, and nosed into the water. They'd welded an additional wave shield to the bow so the duck could break through the heavy California surf. Their compass turned out to be useless. but Ed, undaunted, plowed through the murky night 9 feet up a black cat's ass, as Don put it, to meet the waiting catch. They tied up, quickly transferred the load, and found their way back by aligning 2 lights Dave had set up on shore, marking a safe passage. Heading back, he radioed Dave, who looked at his watch. So far, so good. It was a funny thing to see the duck rise from the darkness, shedding seawater like a real-life nautilus until it stopped rising. By now the tide had gone out, and the duck, weighted down with tie product, sank in the soft sand. The tide wouldn't lift the vehicle for another 6 hours. By that time it would be broad daylight, and the duck would be as conspicuous as a relic on Omaha Beach. "Fuck," Dave said over the radio. "We're stuck." Ed hit the throttle and spun the wheels, sinking the duck deeper into the sand. "Kill the engine," someone yelled. Don got out, looked at the tires, and stood back. "Don't panic," he said. "I know exactly what to do." Don told Alan, who was on the beach, to get a couple of pickup trucks and a lot of rope. Like everyone else, he called the hirsute Alan Fuzzy. The 2 men were close, both a little wild, a couple of pranksters who got under Dave's skin. But by God, they knew how machines worked. Now they assembled an elaborate pulley system connecting the pickups to the duck's winch. "Are you sure this is gonna work?" Dave asked. Don didn't flinch when the motors fired, and sure enough his ad hoc Archimedean apparatus enabled the duck to lift itself out of the sand and back up to the road. It was a goddamn glorious sight. Cheers went up on the beach. Safely back in the barn, the company hands unloaded the duck's fragrant cargo. It was a sweet reward to sample the supply. Don thought the faintly purple buds were thick and beautiful, the finest he'd ever smoked. The cash was processed at the old general store next to the barn. It was the company's biggest haul to date, $8 million, about $33 million today. The company had stepped up its game, bringing in better product with more sophisticated technique. The distributors would be pleased. By now they had been waiting a long time, too. Back in his cabana at the Beverly Hills Hotel as the ringleader, he rarely set foot near the beach himself. Lou had had a hell of a time keeping them calm. He was worried that the company's reputation would be ruined if the supply didn't show. It was a relief to call the dealers and announce, "The Eagle has landed." The exchange with the dealers always happened fast. Like in the movies, the money would come in Halliburton briefcases. Unlike in the movies, the company usually waited to count it. And count it. And count it. And count it. It took so long to count that much cash, they got bored. When all was said and done, the partners each made $500,000 off the operation. For his rescue of the duck, Don got the MVP award, a new company institution, which came with a $25,000 bonus. Everyone else got their wad and scattered to the winds, the sweet scent of their trade wafting from their clothes. It was exhilarating, the money and the camaraderie. Company members saw themselves as hippie outlaws. There was no violence, they didn't even carry guns, just the threat of the law, which bound them together. They were criminals, but they were also a family. Afterward, Lou and Dave sat in Lou's cabana, going through receipts, looking at ledgers, accounting for a very good year. Later, they burned the receipts and went out to a Beverly Hills restaurant to celebrate. "Here's to everyone's efforts," Lou said as they hoisted champagne flutes. "Let's do it again soon." Asterisk not his real name. Lou knew he wouldn't stop until he reached the Pacific. He had left New York in his convertible on that modern-day westward migration, a mid-century manifest destiny, with the top down and the red metal flake lacquer on his Corvette flashing in the sun. On the radio were Dick Dale and the Beach Boys, songs about girls, woodies, surfing. That's where he was headed. He was 25 and looking to change his life. Lou was born in Havana, Cuba, to a family of small business owners. His mother brought him to New York City as a teenager, in 1954, and he liked it, the hustle, the gritty determination required to get ahead. Lou was smart-mouthed and got into more fights than he should have for a guy his size. Despite being small, however, he was a great athlete, and he held his own in the rough and tumble of Flatbush, Brooklyn. After college, Lou studied law at Syracuse, but it was the early 1960s, and the California lifestyle was just dawning on America. Syracuse was awfully far from the beach, and when he heard about a job teaching Spanish at a high school in Coronado, he packed his bags. Coronado was all Lou had hoped for, an easygoing beach town of 18,000 people, known for its handsome Victorian hotel, Navy base, and isolation. It was a funny mix, a sort of military Mayberry. Coronado was connected to the mainland by an isthmus, but it took so long to drive around that it might as well have been an island out in San Diego Bay. Lou loved the nonchalance that came with the geography. Everyone called it the Rock, or, playfully, Idiot Island, a place where people did their own thing. At Coronado High, Lou quickly developed a strong rapport with the students. He was handsome and charming and cultivated a cool image. In addition to teaching Spanish, he coached swimming, water polo, and basketball. Lou liked to shoot hoops with his students after school. He was the kind of coach kids confided in. A lot of his students were Navy brats, raised in strict military families just as Vietnam was escalating. Lou had an ear for what the kids wanted to talk about. He was not much older than them, and he understood. Lou's father died when he was 3, and his own high school basketball coach had helped fill the role. He knew everything that a coach could be. "My boys," he called his players. But when the whistle blew, they knew it was time to work. Lou was a demanding coach, and his players loved him for it. Among Lou's Spanish students was Bob Lahodny, a popular kid with an easy smile, president of the class of '68 2 years in a row. Bob, a swim team star, was a close friend of Ed Otero's, class of '72, another strong swimmer on the team. Ed's nickname was Eddie the Otter, or sometimes just Otter. He was short and stocky, powerfully built, but he didn't like practice and was difficult to control. Lou liked Ed and thought he could have been a great competitive swimmer, but he had no discipline. Discipline was something you needed if you swam or played ball for Lou. He could be unforgiving even with his favorite players, like Harlan Fincher *, the star center of the basketball team. Harlan was tall and friendly. He'd been named Best Personality and Best Sense of Humor in his senior year, and he liked Lou's coaching. Lou thought the same of Harlan's playing, until the day Harlan snuck off with some friends and a bottle of Chivas after school and showed up dead drunk for the last game of the season. Furious, Lou took Harlan off the floor. "When you play for me," Lou told him, "you give me everything." He didn't speak to Harlan again for the rest of his time at Coronado High. The social scene in Coronado in those days was typical of its time: greasers, Letterman, and by the time Gidget was on television, surfers. The greasers wore black Converse, the Letterman wore white tennis shoes, and the surfers tended toward blue topsiders. Over time there were more and more topsiders as surfing took hold. Not far behind Gidget was the rest of the '60s, hair, rock and roll, and drugs. Coronado was fertile ground for the changing times, full of military kids eager to rebel. Alarmed by the influx of drugs, the city government set up a pilot project at the high school to keep students on the straight and narrow. It was called the No Bust Policy, and one of its counselors was Lou Viller. His approach was simpatico. He'd spent plenty of evenings in his kids' homes, watching disciplinarian fathers fume and military wives crawl on the floor after 3 martinis, and he sensed the hypocrisy. He knew the kids were just looking for an outlet and suggested alternatives. "Why smoke a joint," he'd ask, "when there are so many other ways to have fun in life?" It was persuasion over punishment, and Lou was nothing if not persuasive until he stopped believing the message. Lou had always been the bohemian teacher, the one who pulled into the faculty lot in a red Corvette and shades. When the school banned sunglasses, he wore his prescription Ray-Bans in class anyhow. For the students of Coronado High, this was a sign of solidarity. Lou was going through the same changes they were, reflecting a culture that was advancing at a frantic pace. Imagine starting high school in 1964, how fast it was all moving between freshman and senior year, from the Gulf of Tonkin to the Tet Offensive, from the Voting Rights Act to the Watts riots, from Help to the White Album. Like his students, Lou started growing his hair and learned to surf. It was humbling at first, eating salt water 1,000 times before he managed to get up on the board. But once Lou could feel the ocean lift him up and bring him to shore, he was hooked. There was energy in that ride. He started inviting his boys, and some girls, over for dinner. Together they all smoked their first joints. Everyone was scared, convinced they'd go crazy. Instead, smiles gradually spread around the room. They talked waves while the hi-fi played The Doors, whose front man, Jim Morrison, had lived in Coronado. Soon, Lou was counseling his kids against following in their parents' footsteps. "That's not a career," he would say, pointing at the ships moored off the Navy Yard. "That's a war machine." Lou thought it was pretty cool that one of his favorite Spanish students, Dave Struther, a talented musician, wanted to become a rock and roller. Lou started dating Kathy, a beautiful former cheerleader voted most popular the same year she was in the homecoming court, who had graduated from Coronado High a couple of years earlier. She was 7 years younger than Lou, but Lou himself was not yet 30. "We're just kids," he thought, "and the kids are finally in charge." It was just a matter of time before he quit teaching. Nobody wanted to be in the establishment anymore. In the summer of 1969, the summer of Woodstock, he traded his Corvette for a VW bus. During his last week in class, Lou brought in his turntable, wore his shades, and listened to Jethro Tull with his students. The bridge was going up that summer. You could see the caissons rising out of the bay, spelling the end of the rock as a de facto island. In August it opened to traffic. The 2-mile feet of box girder engineering arced gracefully across the bay, connecting Coronado to the rest of the world. The locals gathered on the Coronado side, waiting to watch those first cars roll across, knowing things would never be the same. The boys. 1969. Lance Weber was never cut out for the Navy. He had joined after graduating from Coronado High mostly so he wouldn't get shot at in Vietnam. His father, a Navy captain, wanted him to be an officer, but when Lance's service was up, his parents had to accept that he was just another washed-out swabby loafing around back on the rock. One thing the Navy did do for Lance, however, was teach him how to turn a wrench. After his stint as an engineer on a submarine, he could make anything work. Back in Coronado, he tricked out a VW microbus with a Porsche engine and built the island's first lowrider bicycle by hand. "Here comes the wizard," people would say, watching Lance cruise the beach on his tuned-up rig, barefoot, shirtless, his long blonde hair flowing behind him and a stone smile on his face. Easy Rider had just come out, and leaning back on 2 wheels was maybe the coolest thing you could do. When people said Lance was a space cadet, that meant they thought he was a rad fucking guy. That summer marked the first great marijuana supply shock in the United States, the consequence of booming stateside demand and a drought in Mexico. Prices spiked, encouraging creativity. There were mules caravanning the desert, planes flying low over the Arizona mountains, tires stuffed with green at the border. It was the dream of every pot smoker to get a block, or a kilo, keeping some and selling the rest. And for the stone surfers on the beach in Coronado, there was an enormous arbitrage opportunity just a few miles south. The trick was figuring out how to get the stuff home. It was Lance who came up with the idea of taking to the water. At the Long Bar in Tijuana, he got his hands on 25 pounds of pot and swam it north from the beach by the bull ring of the Plaza Monumental de Tijuana. He washed up on the US side, on a beach with no name, no facilities, not even a parking lot, a perfect terminus for illegal night swims. He did it again, and again. It was dangerous, being in the water at night with only the blinking radio tower lights for guidance, but it was worth it, each delivery netted $5,000. Soon, Lance had a little team of marijuana Marines working with him, swimming as many bundles as they could get their hands on. They were misfits, guys who couldn't get girlfriends in high school before Lance put pot and money in their hands, and now they looked to Lance as their eccentric leader. He got busted in 1971, but the few months he served in Lompoc made him Coronado's first hippie outlaw hero, a local legend. When Lance got back, Paul Acri, one of Lance's misfits, introduced him to a new connection, and they strapped on their fins again. A few bales later, however, they came up with a better idea, a Zodiac, similar to the inflatable rubber crafts used by Navy SEALs. One run in the Zodiac was good for 100 pounds of grass. It was easy money. Looking to expand the little operation, Paul brought in Ed Otero. Ed was the archetypal California boy, blonde, square face, cleft chin, like a letterman who had traded his varsity jacket for the waves. He was a former lifeguard, strong on land. He was known around town for tearing phone books in half and in the surf. They would call him the Otter for his facility in the water, his ability to break through nasty surf with bales in hand. A division of labor emerged. Paul arranged supply, Lance piloted the Zodiac, and Otter swam. The only thing holding them back was the connection, their guy in Tijuana. They called him Joe the Mexican, and since none of them had taken Lou's class, they couldn't understand a word Joe said. Lou was in dungarees, standing on a ladder with paintbrush in hand, when Lance rolled up on his lowrider bike. "You speak Spanish, right?" "Si," Lou said. Natural meant. It was a rhetorical question. "Then come down here," Lance said. "I got an idea." "I don't have time," Lou said. "I have to finish painting this house." "I'll make it worth your time," Lance said. He would pay Lou $50, he explained, to go with him to Tijuana for dinner. $50 sounded good to Lou. He was painting houses for money, living in a little cottage. Since quitting Coronado High, he had become a bona fide beachside Buddhist, surfing, reading Carlos Castaneda, pondering the evils of materialism, making candles, and meditating with a local guru named Beulah. He'd run into his old student, Bob Lahodny, among Beulah's disciples. He had also reconnected with Dave Struther, who had recently returned to Coronado after spending a few years as a studio musician in San Francisco. Life was simple, and Lou and Kathy were having a great time until free love got the best of them. After 4 years together they had split up, driven apart by jealousy. There was nothing wrong with their relationship other than timing. 1971 was a bad time to be young, good-looking, stoned, and married. Now Lou spent his days painting houses and his free time at the beach. That was where he met Lance, out on a jetty where people went to watch the sunset. Lance had gone to Coronado High but graduated before Lou's time. They started hanging out around the rock and roasted some pigs together. Luau's were the thing then. Lou loved that life. But he didn't love being so broke. Traveling down to Tijuana and translating for Lance was the easiest $50 he ever made until Lance offered him $100 the next week to do it again. During the second meeting, Lou sensed an opportunity for his friends and negotiated a larger load for a better price from Joe the Mexican. Impressed, Lance offered Lou a cut of the next shipment. When it was time for the pickup, Lou helped Lance, Paul, and Ed inflate the Zodiac and load it offshore by the little salt-eaten Rosarito beach shack where Joe the Mexican delivered the goods. Once they got it across the border, Lou's share was $10,000. It was more money than he had earned in the past several years. He gave away his painting equipment and never looked back. Like everyone else, Lou had been smoking pot for giggles, but then came a moment of clarity, when he took that joint from behind his ear, sparked it up, and saw the future. The gig. 1972. Gigs, they called them. Or scams. Or barbecues, since they would plan them while throwing steaks on the grill at sundown. Everyone would get the call, "Do you want to go to a barbecue?" when it was time to mobilize. The missions were simple at first, with just the 12-foot Zodiac running a couple 100 pounds at a time from Rosarito to the Silver Strand Beach on Coronado's tiny isthmus. But the loads were getting bigger, and even Eddie the Otter had trouble hauling 50-pound bags through head-high waves. And everyone knew it was unwise seafaring, to say the least, to negotiate the coast in that little raft with no lights and no navigation. Still, Lance was an adventurer. He would have made a great swashbuckler, Lou always thought, or a test pilot. When Lance reached the Silver Strand, he'd signal with a flashlight and run the Zodiac right up onto the sand, burn up the motor. He'd say, "We'll buy a new one." They would offload the bags, deflate the boat, and pack it all into the van. It would be over in 5 minutes, the most exciting 5 minutes they'd ever experienced, everyone holding their breath until the van was on the road, knowing as they drove away that they each had just made twice their parents' annual salary. At first there was 1 gig a month. Then it was 1 a week. Within a year, the crew was scaling up from the Zodiacs to a clandestine armada of speedboats, fishing boats, even a 40-foot cabin cruiser. Some of the money they made went back into the business. Lance bought a Chris Craft called the Lee Max 2 and rebuilt the engine so he could carry serious weight at top speeds. They hired beach crews to expedite the offload. It was risky, bringing more people into the operation, but it was Coronado, and everyone knew each other. "If we take care of them," Lance said, "they'll take care of us." And the partners could afford to be generous. Still in their 20s, they were walking around with $50,000 in their pockets, then $100,000, then $250,000. "Don't you love it?" Lance once remarked, "when life goes from black and white to technicolor." Lou walked into a bank, asked for the balance of his mother's house, and paid it off in cash. Once, when he was buying first-class tickets to Hawaii for himself and his girlfriend, it dawned on him that he had enough money to hang out there and surf for the rest of his life. And he might have, had Ed and Lance not flown over personally to retrieve their partner. "Come on, Senor Viller," Ed said. "There's more money to be made." It got to be like clockwork, enough so that sometimes Lance's and Lou's girlfriends would tag along on the supply runs to Tijuana. It was about this time that Lance started calling Lou Pops, a nickname that caught on. "What do you think, Pops?" Lance asked one evening, drinking Coronas on the beach in Baja. "I think we got a good thing going here," Lou said. "Let's not fuck it up." Lance Weber, top right, and friends from Coronado pose with the Coronado Company's DUKW amphibious landing craft. Photo, courtesy of Gary Kidd. The agency. 1973. When the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration opened its office in the San Diego suburb of National City in 1973, it had just 6 field agents. The DEA was a brand new agency, assembled from various other departments, including the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, BNDD, a tautologically titled bureaucratic relic that was poorly equipped to fight the war on drugs that President Richard Nixon had declared in 1971. The impetus for the drug war was a congressional report issued the same year stating that as much as 15% of U.S. soldiers serving in Vietnam, a conflict that put hundreds of thousands of Americans in close proximity to the Golden Triangle, had come back hooked on heroin. The same report said that half of the service smoked pot. Alongside other law enforcement agencies like the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the FBI, the DEA was tasked with fighting what Nixon called the new menace. Bobby Dunn was one of the first agents working out of the new office. He'd started his law enforcement career in National City a dozen years earlier, as an animal control officer. After working his way up through the ranks of the local police department, he'd become a federal narcotics agent in 1968 and spent several years working in Guadalajara, Mexico. Dunn was excited to be abroad but quickly realized that corruption in Mexico made his job nearly impossible. When he came back to the States, he asked to join the DEA's San Diego office, because the action, as they called it, was at the border. The new agency needed all the local savvy it could get. San Diego was a world apart from drug interdiction on the East Coast, where well-understood organized crime syndicates brought heroin in through the ports. California was a new front, the Wild West. Newly arrived agents couldn't believe it. In one 12-hour shift at San Isidro, you'd get 3 or 4 hauls of 100 kilos. Dunn was the first officer to pull a full ton of pot out of a truck heading north. Dunn was a field agent, and in San Diego the work lived up to the title. In other DEA offices, you went to work in a suit and tie and spent a lot of time at your desk. In San Diego, the agents were veterans of border details and dressed like vaqueros, boots, jeans, guayaberas, cowboy hats. They spoke Spanish, wore beards and mustaches, and spent the nights in Tijuana bars with informants and local cops. To get anywhere, you had to roll up your sleeves and go drinking down in Revolucion, getting to know the people on both sides of the border trade. None of that shoe leather work, however, clued the DEA into the new homegrown smuggling organization right under their noses, on the other side of San Diego Bay. The DEA's first tip about the company came from a Coronado police officer who had heard through the grapevine about some local guys and a former teacher running bales of pot up the coast. The beach runs weren't in Coronado proper and were beyond police jurisdiction, so the officer called the feds. Dunn was intrigued. He was assigned to a special unit that worked closely with local police and other law enforcement, and he debriefed the Coronado officer. He arranged for the Coast Guard to run some exercises with Zodiacs and realized that the small crafts could cruise the coast without showing up on radar. Very clever, he thought. Then the DEA got wind of a boat called the Limax II, owned by a local kid named Lance Weber who had done time in Lompoc a couple years before for smuggling. There were reports of the Limax II on the water at 3 a.m., and Dunn doubted they were out fishing. Once, following a late-night sighting of Lance's boat, the DEA posted agents at regular intervals along the coast, hoping to catch the smugglers in action. They saw the boat motoring away from a lonely stretch of beach in Carlsbad, north of San Diego. Dunn and the other agents rushed to the scene and scoured the beach, but it was too late. All they found were footprints going up the dunes to a house overlooking the ocean. Professionals. 1974. Lately, Lou had been spending more time in North County. There was money up there, in Carlsbad, where he rented a house, and knew hot spots like Del Mar and La Costa. One night, Lou met the owner of the Albatross, a nice seafood restaurant housed in an old church in Del March. He thought the place was groovy, good food, drinks, and music, and well attended by rich dopers. The owner of the restaurant was a big-time distributor himself. Lou had come to recognize that smuggling was as much about personality as it was about know-how. To climb the ladder, you had to play it cool. Which is what he and the restaurant owner did, warily revealing their mutual interest, pulling their cards away from their vests to talk about how they might fit into each other's business models. "How much can you handle?" Lou asked. "How much can you bring?" the owner replied. The Albatross crowd offered Lou entree to a new class of distributors, the kind of dealers who dressed well and belonged to racket clubs. Lou began joining them for dinner, talking books, travel, and wine. They turned Lou onto a wine importer up in San Francisco, and he started ordering Bordeaux and white Burgundies. Refinement suited him. By now he had cut his hair and traded his hippie beads for silk shirts. When Lou suggested bringing in a ton, and the dealers said they'd pay cash on the barrelhead, he saw the horizon expanding before his eyes. Lance delighted in the prospect of expanding their little navy. But carrying more weight meant more people on the beach, 5-10 guys running bags up and down the sand, and they needed to tighten the screws on the organization. Lou started strategizing. He turned to his good friend and former student Dave Struther. Dave's band was still playing around town, and he had recently married a tall, good-looking hippie girl named Linda. But Lou knew he was struggling financially. "Are you interested in some profitable moonlighting?" Lou asked him one day. Dave, a solid-body surfer, handled himself well in the waves and started as a loader. But he was a gifted planner, and it wasn't long before Lou gave him more managerial duties. Lou wanted a right-hand man, and Dave was a natural. He was a drummer, after all, used to keeping time, being the backbone. Even in his hippie days he was fastidious, shampooing his long hair every day, and belying his nickname, Dirty Dave. That hair was gone once Dave started running around with a clipboard and checklists, buying and storing equipment, running smuggling gigs like a stevedore superintendent. That put Dave at odds with Ed, whose run-and-gun style had been central to the early days of the operation but was fast becoming obsolete. Ed was a beloved figure around Coronado, a fun guy, the life of every party. But he was impulsive. When Ed was a lifeguard, he liked to drive his truck down the sand at full speed, and that's how he'd flipped it right into the water. Dave bristled when he would show up at a gig at the last minute and start bossing people around, imperiling Dave's meticulous plans. Dave would appeal to Lou, who tried to promote Ed out of Dave's hair. "You don't want to be a grunt on the beach," he told him. "You're in management. Let Dave roll up his sleeves." That mostly worked, at least at the smuggling sites. Off the beach was another matter. Ed was young, wild, and flush, a dangerous combination in a small town. Here he was, no known job, celebrating one of the organization's first big paydays at the chart house down on the Embarcadero, cozying up to some girl with his hands full of cash. "Look what I got, baby," Ed told her, laying out 10 grand in bills. Lou would have jumped on the table to cover it up, but the whole place had seen it already. "We need to cut these shenanigans," Lou told his colleagues. "We're gonna bring heat on ourselves." What he didn't know was that they already had. The dia was onto Lance, watching him run the Lee Max 2 like a daredevil, at full speed on autopilot, ripping through the swells like a lunatic. And Lance was as flamboyant on land as he was cavalier in the cockpit. He knew he was known to the authorities, and he loved pushing his luck. "I like making the cops look bad," he'd say. "It's fun." Not to Lou, it wasn't. One night after a gig in Carlsbad, they'd planned to meet at a coffee shop near Oceanside Harbor after the beach crew unloaded the shipment. Lou was sitting in his booth with a fork in a slice of cherry pie when he looked up and saw Lance drive past in his truck, pulling the Lee Max 2 on its trailer, 2 squad cars in tow. The cops tore the boat apart, right in front of the coffee shop, but found nothing. Lance relished his little victory and then walked in to meet Lou. "Don't even talk to me," Lou said, jumping up to leave. "Just keep walking." It was the same night Special Agent Dunn found footsteps on the beach near Lou's house. The DIA agents had followed Lance in his boat to the marina, but when the boat came out clean, the district attorney refused the DIA a search warrant for the house. It was a close call. Lou didn't realize how close when he moved to Solana Beach and relocated the entire smuggling outfit out of Coronado. It was the first time some of its members had lived anywhere besides the Rock. By then, everyone on the island knew what they were up to. They even had a name for their hometown smugglers, the Coronado Company. The name stuck. Lou had misgivings about it, but it suited the group's professional aspirations. By now they were evolving quickly. Lou turned out to be not just a natural leader, but also an organizational genius. The one-time anti-materialist candle maker became a business visionary, laying out plans for the company to dominate its market niche. As he had when he was a coach, Lou knew how to motivate people, establish mutual trust, and make the members of his squad believe in their abilities. Pops was now a father figure to a new kind of team. "It was fun in those early days," he told his boys in the company, "but amateur hour is over." The new organization left little room for Paul Acree. Paul was always his own worst enemy. He was cold and had a nasty gift of gab. He could be funny, but always at the expense of others. Paul had found the crew's original line of supply in Tijuana, but Lou knew he wasn't the right guy to make the bigger connections the operation needed to grow. You couldn't look like a hood at the next level. His idea of business, give me the money, you get the pot, was oafish. Where was the salesmanship in that? Where was the finesse? And lately, Paul had started sniffling and rubbing his nose. Nobody knew when exactly he had become an addict. Maybe it was when everyone got rich and he could suddenly get as much heroin and coke as he wanted. Once driven, he was coasting now, showing up at meetings with watery eyes. He looked terrible. He was Lance's friend, but even Lance knew that you couldn't trust a junkie. When the company convened to vote Paul out, it was unanimous. One of the company's Mexican contacts, known as Pepe de Mexicali, had told Lou about the time he had to get rid of an associate who had been caught with his fingers in the jar by taking him on a one-way plane ride. The Coronado company's style was more genteel than that. If you got fired, they just stopped calling you. With Paul, the partners decided, they would simply move away. They left him with $10,000. It wasn't much in the way of hush money, especially for a guy who was speedballing, but that was the offer. With Paul gone, Lou took on an even larger role within the company, and he started to act the part. He conducted business from his new house in Solana Beach, on a cliff overlooking the ocean, with his Malamute, Prince, at his feet. There he'd preside with his girlfriend, Carrie Kavanagh, a waitress he'd met at another Tony spot in nearby Cardiff by the sea. Lou had left her a $100 tip one night, followed the next day by 20 dozen roses, along with a card bearing a poem he wrote. Carrie thought the roses were a bit tacky. A nice little bouquet of hand-picked wildflowers would have better suited a girl like her, but the poem was nice. She showed up at Lou's house, where she found him sunbathing on the deck. Lou had spent a few years floating between girls, but he saw immediately that Carrie had a spark. She was smart, with a bright smile and an eager outlook on the world. Lou was older, wealthier, and more worldly than the boys who hit on her on the beach. He doted on her, gave her gifts and several cars, paid for her dance classes. Soon she moved from her beach trailer into Lou's place. They would entertain the rest of the company guys and their girlfriends there, drinking greyhounds until dinner and then smoking and doing lines while dancing to the average white band until 3 in the morning. The next day, they'd wake up and start all over again. Lou initially told Carrie he was an interior decorator, but she didn't believe it for long. His place was well decorated, but she never saw a single catalog or bolt of fabric around. It wasn't a surprise when Lou finally confessed that he was a drug kingpin, nor did it change how she felt about him. Carrie was the kind of girl who watched the Watergate hearings from beginning to end. With her anti-establishment sympathies, Lou's profession had a renegade appeal. For his part, Lou saw himself as a new kind of CEO. He just wanted to excel at what he did. He was already a multimillionaire, as were his partners. They thought that was all the money in the world. They were wrong. Carrie Kavanagh and Lou Villers shortly after they first met, in the mid-70s. Carrie Kavanagh and Lou Villers shortly after they first met, in the mid-70s. The Dawn. 1975. Lou and Dave were south of the border, in a Tijuana flophouse near the racetrack, surrounded by a dozen men with machine guns. They were drug lord foot soldiers, you could tell from the chrome-plated pistols in their belts. No one moved. Dave and Lou waited. The seconds felt like hours. They had gotten themselves into the situation on purpose, after deciding that the company should do some supply chain outreach. Dave had run across a guy they called Rick Pick who said he knew Roberto Beltran. The Don. The head of the Sinaloa-based trafficking syndicate, one of the biggest drug dealers in the world. Lou and Rick met and sized each other up. Once they decided that they trusted each other, Lou said, "Introduce me to the Don." Thus began a series of false starts and frustrations. Late at night, Lou and Dave would get a call and rush to the appointed meeting place under the San Diego side of the Coronado Bridge, only to find nobody there. Finally, when the real call came to meet in Tijuana, Lou arrived 2 hours late on purpose. That's the Mexican style of business, he thought. Mañana, Keeping them waiting, Lou reasoned, would show that they were equals. But now, trapped deep inside the syndicate's flop house, they knew they were not equals. And Beltran's guys didn't look happy. Dave was terrified. But Lou kept his game face. He was still wondering if the meeting was for real. "Are we going to see the Don?" he asked. Finally, the Don's bodyguard, who went by the name El Guapo, led them into a small room. There, reclining on a king-size bed, was Beltran. Dave and Lou were surprised to see that the Don looked like a Maharishi, or maybe a bum, scraggly hair, jeans, unshaven. When they walked in,